On the morning of October 19, 1992, Laura Houghteling, a 23 years old who had just graduated from Harvard and was beginning a promising career, suddenly disappeared. At Laura's peaceful Bethesda home, there were many signs of something unusual. Her car was still parked in the yard, and the sheets on her bed had been removed. A few days later, a bloody pillow was found nearby, with the imprint of a knife blade on the fabric. Several neighbors claimed to have seen Laura leave the house that morning, wearing a coat and carrying a large bag. However, the investigation revealed that the person they saw was not Laura, but her killer, a man wearing a wig and women's clothing to disguise himself as the victim, to create the impression that she was still alive. That man was Hadden Clark, the Houghteling family's trusted gardener with a troubled past and many gruesome secrets. The story of Laura Houghteling is not just a disappearance that led to tragedy, but also a ruthless cover-up. The killer not only murdered the victim, but also disguised himself as her to conceal the crime. From here, the horrifying truth gradually emerged, dragging the entire Bethesda community into a nightmare that lasted for decades. Laura Houghteling was born on April 8, 1969, in Bethesda, Maryland, USA. Her parents divorced in 1977. When she was still very young, her father suffered from chronic depression and died while she was still in school. Laura grew into a bright, positive, active, compassionate, and hardworking woman. She was an excellent student and never caused trouble for her mother. After graduating from high school, she focused on her studies and was accepted into Harvard. Success that came from careful preparation. Graduating, Laura moved back in with her mother and found a full-time job at a public relations firm. By 1992, at age 23, she was working hard, building her career, and staying close to her family, friends, and boyfriend. On Monday, October 19, 1992, Laura's workday was scheduled to start at 10 o'clock a.m. She was expected to leave home around 9 o'clock a.m., but never arrived at the office. At 11 o'clock a.m., Laura's boss, Diana Holman, called home, worried. Laura had not asked for leave, nor had she reported being late, which was completely against her responsible behavior. Laura lived with her mother, who had left the day before to visit another city and was due back after lunch. With no way to reach Laura, this was before cell phones, Diana contacted her daughter, Hillary, who was friends with Laura. Hillary also hadn't heard from her that morning and became worried. Hillary volunteered to go to Laura's house to check. She noticed Laura's car still in the driveway, which was unusual since Laura typically drove to work. She knocked, rang the bell, and called out but got no response. She walked around the house, looked through the windows, and saw nothing unusual. Thinking that Laura's room was out of sight, she decided to try going in. The front door was locked. The back door was unlocked. She quickly checked the rooms but found nothing out of place and returned to the office around 1 o'clock p.m. She told her mother what had happened, and they reached Laura's brother, Warren, who lived nearby, immediately went to the house. He saw what Hillary had described: Laura's car in the driveway, the house quiet, no one inside. It seemed as if Laura had simply vanished. This was completely out of character. She took her job seriously and viewed it as key to her future. Later, Laura's mother, Penny, returned from her trip. She wasn't initially alarmed, assuming Laura was at work, with friends, or with her boyfriend. She lay down to rest and fell asleep. Early the next morning, she went to check on Laura, who should have been home getting ready for work. To her surprise, Laura wasn't in her room. Penny grew concerned. It was unusual for Laura to be away overnight without notice, especially since she always used her car to commute. Laura missed work again that day. When Diana called and explained the situation, Penny became truly frightened. Warren soon arrived at the house. He didn't know their mother, Penny, had returned the day before. He explained that he and Hillary had started an informal search after the police declined to take a missing person report, saying too little time had passed. Alarmed, Penny joined the effort. Seeing that Warren and Hillary had made little progress, she went to the local police station and filed a missing persons report herself. The detectives, persuaded by her urgency, opened an investigation. Investigators immediately checked Laura's bank accounts and found no activity in recent days. On October 20, they began contacting her close circle, interviewing friends and family. They learned that Laura spent Saturday evening with her boyfriend and stayed home on Sunday to relax. That day, she made a few calls to friends and went to the store. No one knew where she could have gone. A neighbor, the last known witness to see Laura, reported that around 9 a.m. on October 19, Laura left the house. She was seen on the porch locking the door, then walked toward the barn. A minute later, she came back out, closed the gate, and left. She was carrying a large bag or something similar. She looked normal, except she wore a coat and trousers instead of her usual skirts. She also walked past her car, even though she would normally drive to the office. This struck her mother and brother as strange. Almost no clues. Apart from Penny's account, Laura's mother, she said Laura had never left the bed messy, but after the trip back, she found the bed sheets and pillows were gone. Detectives hadn't spotted this at first. It seemed Laura had left in a hurry and, for some reason, taken the bedding. Everything is becoming increasingly suspicious. The family distributed flyers throughout the city with Laura's photo and description. Lacking evidence, the detectives returned to examine the bed closely. They initially thought Laura had soiled the sheets and had them laundered, but they were nowhere to be found. They checked the nearest dry cleaner, but neither the pillow nor the sheet was found. The search stalled until the fourth day, when a bloody pillow was found near Laura's family home. One side was heavily stained with blood, and there were disturbing marks that looked like a knife blade had been wiped on the fabric. On the back of the pillow, investigators found a partial fingerprint in blood. Tests showed the blood type matched Laura's, and the print was consistent with her. At that point, investigators brought in cadaver dogs. They no longer believed this was a voluntary disappearance. They suspected foul play and escalated the search. Detectives collected blood samples from Laura's mother and brother and examined Laura's personal items. The most notable was a comb holding about 30 hairs. Testing confirmed most belonged to Laura, but a few were synthetic, suggesting the comb had been used on a wig. No one in Laura's immediate circle wore a wig, nor did any of them have a history of violence or legal trouble. When the dog was released again to follow the scent, it ran straight to Laura's front door and stopped, not moving any further. The team could not follow it. Detectives then examined Laura's room with luminol. It revealed a large amount of blood on the mattress, so much that they feared Laura might already be dead. They noticed a clear contradiction between the testimony and the evidence. If Laura had been attacked in her bed, she would have bled to death there. So how could she have walked out the front door while getting ready for work? Investigators initially thought the witness who said this was mistaken or confused about the timing, but later, another person confirmed the account exactly. Could it have been a staged scenario? On the sixth day of the search, Warren contacted the police. He said that the previous day, he had run into his mother's gardener, who was working on their property. Warren intended to ask about Laura, but when he saw him, the gardener immediately stepped on the gas and ran away, disappearing in an unknown direction. Warren had known that Laura had argued with this person about a week before her disappearance, so his behavior became even more suspicious. Detectives focused on him and first spoke with Laura's mother, Penny. She said she hadn't seen the gardener for several days. Though he did reach out to her after his encounter with Warren, Penny had used his services for a long time and trusted him completely. He even knew there was a spare house key in the shed. The gardener, a 42 years old named Hadden Clark, quickly came under close scrutiny. He was born on July 31, 1952, in New York City. By the time Laura went missing, Hadden was already known to police. He had prior robbery charges and had been linked to the disappearance of a 6-year-old girl about a year earlier. His life had been troubled from the start. His mother struggled with alcoholism, and his father suffered from depression and aggression. Even his birth was difficult. He sustained a head injury, which his mother blamed on forceps used during delivery. Whether or not that was the cause, the injury affected him throughout his life. Hadden was slow to develop. His younger brother, Jeff, described Hadden's perception of reality as distorted. Although he was never seen harming animals, people often noticed him near animal carcasses. He claims he was just curious and meant no harm. But the frequency of these coincidences seems alarming. As an adult, he struggled to keep jobs. Despite training as a professional chef and working in major restaurants and on cruise ships, he couldn't stay employed for long. He joined the Navy in 1982, but in 1985, he was discharged after being diagnosed with schizophrenia, a diagnosis no one had addressed before then. Friends and family hadn't realized he was seriously ill. Hadden later claimed shipmates had attacked and badly beaten him, and he said the resulting psychological trauma triggered many of his problems. After returning from service, his family noticed his condition worsening. Before the Navy, he might keep a job for a couple of months. Afterward, he couldn't hold full-time work long enough to even earn a first paycheck. By the early 1990s, he had no stable housing and lived in his van. Occasionally, he managed to rent a room, but he was repeatedly evicted for various reasons. His behavior was often disturbing. In one case, he rented a basement room in a family's home. Concerned about his behavior, the family asked him to move out before their daughter returned from college. He agreed but sought revenge. He cut into a section of wall and sealed fish heads inside. The family endured a terrible smell for a long time before tearing the room apart and discovering what he had done. After that, he became Penny's gardener. From the beginning, he was straightforward about his mental health problems. She hired him long-term and, for some reason, believed that he needed help and was not dangerous. Hadden worked for her for several months, and they grew close. She treated him like a son and even protected him when the police first approached her with suspicions about him. Penny was very upset, accusing the police of trying to pin Laura's abduction on a convenient scapegoat. At the time Laura disappeared, Hadden held multiple jobs. He worked as a gardener for several families and also made deliveries on roller skates. He was frequently seen driving around town, making deliveries, despite Penny's objections. Warren's account of Hadden's suspicious behavior intrigued the police, who decided to question Hadden. On October 22, they brought him to the station. He claimed he had spent Sunday at a small restaurant watching television and returned to his van by 11 o'clock p.m., where he fell asleep. Hadden said that between 9 and 10 o'clock a.m. on the morning Laura disappeared, he was at the restaurant. He then went to a supermarket, visited a family where he did gardening, and afterward saw his friend Sue, who was at the station to support him during questioning. According to Hadden, he briefly encountered Warren while driving past the family's house. Hadden said he didn't know Warren wanted to talk to him and just kept driving. He denied any involvement in Laura's disappearance, saying there was no evidence against him. He was released, but his behavior raised concerns, prompting detectives to review his financial records. They discovered that shortly before Laura disappeared, Hadden purchased duct tape, rope, nylon cord, and trash bags at a hardware store. He paid by check and wrote Laura in the memo line. On the day she vanished, he also bought a large bed sheet, later found in his van. The king-size sheet fit Laura's bed, but Hadden didn't have a bedroom, let alone a bed that large. Making the purchase suspicious, investigators also learned that Hadden rented a small storage unit in Warwick, Rhode Island, about 500 kilometers from Laura's home. He last visited the unit 2 days after Laura disappeared, a fact he never mentioned during questioning. Police obtained search warrants for his van and the storage unit. Inside the unit's closet, they found women's clothing, including underwear, a dress, shoes, a coat, several wigs, and a necklace. All items were collected for examination. When investigators showed them to Laura's mother, she said some resembled Laura's belongings. However, none of Laura's personal items were actually missing. Family was then asked to review the storage contents. His brother said he had seen Hadden dress as a woman several times, but had assumed it was a joke or a game. The wigs were sent to a lab for analysis. Fibers from one wig matched hair found on Laura's brush. The evidence was then forwarded to the FBI for more precise testing, including dye comparison. which confirmed the hairs were identical. Investigators also compared Hadden's fingerprints, already on file, to a partial print found on Laura's pillowcase. It matched. With this evidence, the prosecutor decided to charge Hadden. Finding him wasn't easy because he had no permanent address and wasn't renting a place. A wanted poster eventually led police to his van, parked near the Bethesda Baptist Church. Looking through the window, detectives saw Hadden asleep, holding a teddy bear. They knocked, woke him, ordered him out, and arrested him for Laura Houghteling's murder. Hadden did not resist. He remained calm, went with the police, and kept the teddy bear with him, including during questioning. Despite developmental and behavioral challenges, he understood his legal situation and immediately asked for a lawyer, refusing to cooperate. Interrogation tactics failed to elicit information. The trial was set for June 14, 1993. It was expected to be difficult because Laura's body had not been found. Before the trial began, Hadden was offered a plea deal, which he accepted. At the hearing, he read a prepared statement. According to his confession, early on October 19, 1992, Hadden used a spare key to enter the house and found Laura alone in her bedroom. He claimed she was already dead, with a pillow over her face, as if she had suffocated. Panicking, he said he wrapped her in a sheet, dragged her to the woods, and buried her. Hadden insisted he acted alone and understood what he was doing. His story conflicted with the evidence and seemed implausible. However, the key part of his deal with law enforcement was his promise to reveal the location of Laura's body so her family could bury her. Hadden led police to Laura's grave, about 500 meters from her home. It was a shallow grave near a road, hidden in dense undergrowth. Parts of her limbs were exposed, and investigators immediately found signs of scavenging by wild animals, which had gnawed her arm and leg. At trial, the prosecution presented its version of events. They argued that Hadden had been watching Laura's family and knew her mother was away. He waited until Laura was asleep, then attacked her, stabbing her several times with a kitchen knife. She did not die from the wounds, severely bleeding and unable to resist. Laura lost consciousness and was then smothered with a pillow. Hadden admitted he wanted a souvenir, as some serial killers do. He chose one of Laura's earrings, but, unable to unclasp it, cut it off along with part of her earlobe. After disposing of the body, Hadden returned to the house to clean up evidence. He then disguised himself in women's clothing, used Laura's comb to adjust his wig, and selected clothes similar to what Laura typically wore, adding trousers and a coat to mask differences in their builds. He left the house at the time. Laura usually departed for work, hoping to mislead witnesses. Those who believed they saw Laura that morning had actually seen Hadden in disguise. But from a distance, they didn't notice. He fooled the neighbors, but not the detectives. Investigators reconstructed the events and concluded that Hadden later tried to return to the house with a newly purchased sheet, unaware that a search for Laura was already underway. This, they believed, explained why he panicked and fled when Warren encountered him. While dragging the bedding and body into the woods, Hadden lost a pillow, which police later recovered. He dug only a shallow grave, inadequate to protect the remains from animals. Laura's remains were in such poor condition that, after collecting all necessary evidence, authorities decided on immediate cremation. She was laid to rest beside her father, whom she often remembered. Detectives and Laura's family were determined to understand the motive. An autopsy ruled out abuse. Hadden initially denied having a motive, then later claimed he had grown close to Penny and saw her as a mother figure. After Laura returned from Harvard, he felt sidelined as Penny focused more on her daughter. He said he was jealous of their relationship and expressed regret, though many doubted his explanation. In a plea deal in the summer of 1993, Hadden Clark pleaded guilty to Laura Houghteling second-degree murder and received a sentence of 30 years. The investigation did not end there. A search of his property uncovered a large collection of jewelry, over 200 pieces, believed to be trophies. This raised suspicions that he was a serial killer who kept souvenirs from victims. At least one allegation was substantiated. Multiple investigations followed. 6 months into his sentence, Hadden was charged with the murder of 6-year-old Michele Dorr. Hadden had been a suspect from the start, but prosecutors lacked evidence until DNA testing became available. Michele was last seen on May 31, 1986, at her father's home in Silver Spring, Maryland. She was wearing a bathing suit and heading to the backyard pool. Her father was briefly distracted and then realized she was missing. After an unsuccessful search, he called the police. At first, suspicion fell on Michele's father, who was divorced from her mother and emotionally distressed. His erratic behavior after Michele's disappearance deepened that suspicion. Detectives eventually refocused on Hadden, who was living with his brother next door at the time and could have abducted Michele. After Hadden was convicted of Laura's murder, investigators searched his brother's house and found bloodstains on the floor. DNA analysis confirmed the blood belonged to Michele. Hadden confessed he lured Michele into the house by claiming another girl lived there, then attacked her in an upstairs bedroom. He admitted to attempted assault and described other acts of extreme violence. He hid her body and, as part of a plea agreement, led detectives to her remains in a park about 20 kilometers from her home. He received a 30-year sentence for Michele's murder and later an additional 10 years for robbing the Mahaney family. All sentences were ordered to run consecutively, totaling 70 years. He will not be eligible for release until June 2063, by which time he would be nearly 112 years old, effectively a life sentence. The families of Laura and Michele welcomed the outcome. Between 1999 and 2002, Hadden repeatedly claimed involvement in other crimes, but none have been confirmed. Some confessions were false, and others remain unverified. Hadden was not the only member of his family implicated in severe crimes. His brother Bradfield Clark murdered his girlfriend, Patricia Mag, in 1984 and later confessed. After 2000, Hadden offered another explanation for killing Michele and Laura, asserting he believed consuming the blood of female victims would help him become a woman. This claim is widely considered unconvincing. Hadden is currently held in a maximum security state prison. That morning, Araceli Ramos left home, her heart filled with hope for a new future. No one knew it would be the last time she would see the light of the sun. The 19-year-old girl, born into poverty but with a burning dream in her heart, I just wanted to find a job to buy a graduation gown and help her mother, a single mother who raised 6 children on her own. But it was that desire to change her life that led Araceli into a deadly trap set by Walter Vineder, a man who once wore a military uniform as a symbol of honor, but behind it was a rotten, sinister mind filled with hatred and cruelty. In just a few hours, Araceli's dream was crushed. She disappeared without a trace, leaving behind a mother in despair and a country stunned by a cold, brutal crime. Why was an innocent girl turned into a pawn in a murderer's crazy revenge plot? What exactly happened inside that seemingly abandoned house? Stay until the end of this video to retrace each trace, lifting the bloody curtain of the murder of Araceli Ramos. Araceli Ramos was born in 1994 in Misiones province, Argentina, into a family with very limited means. Her mother, Criselda Gonzalez, raised 6 children on her own and worked tirelessly to support them. They eventually settled in a modest neighborhood in Buenos Aires province, where Araceli grew up. Friends and family describe Araceli as a cheerful, affectionate, and responsible person. She was a good student with a kind heart and dreamed of becoming financially independent to help her family. By 2013, Araceli was in her final year of high school and already planning her future. She wanted to study international trade at a private university. She also told her mother she hoped to get married and have her first child by age 26. At the time, Araceli was dating Federico, a 20-year-old medical student who lived in another town. They had been together for a little over a year and seemed very much in love. On weekends, Araceli often traveled to visit him. Although they hadn't made formal plans to marry, their relationship was serious. Like many young women her age, Araceli enjoyed fashion and cared about her appearance. Still, she was mindful of her family's situation. As a teenager, she took small jobs, working in a grocery store or selling clothes, to cover her expenses. She didn't have much money saved up. But that year, she set a specific goal to buy a new blouse for her graduation party. Motivated by this, she began looking for a more stable, better-paying job online, hoping to take her first steps toward independence. She had no idea this search would lead her into a deadly trap. In mid-September 2013, Araceli found a social media post advertising modeling jobs in a nearby town. "Intrigued," she replied. After a brief message exchange with the supposed employer, she shared her phone number, and they arranged an in-person meeting. The meeting was set for September 30, 2013. That morning, Araceli got up early, carefully dressed, and prepared to make a good impression. Before leaving, she told her mother she would visit a friend first and then go to the interview, promising to be back within 3 hours. To be safe, she wrote down the address of the meeting place, but she never returned. At first, Griselda, Araceli's mother, I tried to stay calm, thinking that her daughter might have started working right away. As evening came with no news, her worry turned to anguish. The next morning, the family checked local hospitals, fearing Araceli might have had an accident. When they found no trace of her, they returned to the note she had left and went to the address. The house was empty. By October 2 days after Araceli was last seen, Griselda filed a missing person report. Federico accompanied her and cooperated with the police, but he soon became a suspect. Investigators questioned him and searched his home, finding no evidence connecting him to Araceli's disappearance. Authorities launched a large-scale search. Around 200 officers combed the area, and divers searched the Reconquista River. Investigators focused on the house where the interview was supposed to take place. The property belonged to an 81-year-old woman, Aida Amoroso. Strangely, no one had seen her since mid-September, a couple of weeks before Araceli went missing. Meanwhile, forensic analysts examined Araceli's phone records and her activity on the social network where she had been contacted. The digital evidence pointed to one person, Walter Viniter, a 38-year-old former petty officer of the Argentine Naval Prefecture. He quickly became the prime suspect. Born around 1974, Viniter held the rank of cabo. On social media, he posted photos in full uniform, flaunting decorations that projected an image of honor and discipline. Behind that carefully crafted image was a very different reality. Records showed a long history of manipulation, fraud, and extortion. Along with strong suspicions of involvement in human trafficking networks, his criminal past stretched back years. In 2004, Walter forged a colleague's signature to obtain a loan and used the money to start a private security company. These illegal actions led to his dismissal from the prefecture in 2006, and shortly afterward he was imprisoned for fraud. During a search of his belongings, authorities found papers filled with threats and insults aimed at a woman identified in the press as Janina. Police located Janina, who revealed she was Walter's former partner. She had left him after repeated episodes of violence. According to her, he began stalking and extorting her following their breakup. Encouraged by the police, she filed a complaint, and Walter was arrested. In 2011, he received a sentence of 2 years and 10 months in prison. While serving his sentence, Walter met another inmate, Emilio Resonico, who had been convicted of offenses related to banned substances. Emilio's mother was Aida Amoroso, the elderly woman whose house later became central to Araceli's disappearance. Aida died in July 2013 after a long illness, just months before Araceli vanished. Testimony from Aida's daughter, Solange, later clarified the events that followed. She said Walter contacted the family to report Aida's death, claiming he had been at her side when she took her last breath. He also told them that Aida's final wish was cremation. Using this show of loyalty, Walter ingratiated himself with the family. According to Solange, He manipulated Aida by convincing her that her caretaker planned to rob her. Frightened, Aida dismissed her helper, allowing Walter to step in as her supposed protector. To the family, he seemed generous and helpful. In reality, his intentions were far darker. On October 8, 2013, the investigation took a decisive turn when police arrested Walter during a raid on his home in the Mataderos neighborhood of Buenos Aires. Inside, police found documents that directly linked him to Aida, her house papers, and a copy of her death certificate. Phone records strengthened the case. Investigators confirmed Walter had called Araceli at least 25 times before the supposed job interview, many from the area where she was meant to meet her employer. It became clear that their communication began days earlier through a social media post advertising a fake modeling opportunity. Piece by piece, the investigation pointed to Walter Venator, whose criminal past had been hidden behind a facade of respectability. At the time of his arrest, Walter had visible injuries, scratches on his arms, and a bruise above one eyebrow. A medical examiner examined the wound to determine whether it was recent and what caused it. Despite the growing evidence, Araceli was still missing. Walter insisted he was innocent and denied knowing her. Investigators, however, believed he had lured Araceli with the false job offer and taken her to Aida's house, a property he had fraudulently taken over. For Araceli's family, every day without news was agonizing. Her mother, Criselda, begged for answers and feared her daughter had been taken by a trafficking network. Friends, classmates, and neighbors organized marches and vigils to demand justice and keep pressure on the authorities. The case advanced after news outlets reported Walter's arrest. A hired car driver who saw his photo recognized him and immediately went to the police. The driver testified that a few days earlier, he had driven Walter from his home in Mataderos to an empty lot. The driver remembered that Walter carried a heavy bag. When asked about it, Walter calmly said it was the base of an antenna he needed to discard because he worked as an installer. On October 11, 2013, 12 days after Araceli disappeared, police searched the area described by the driver. They found exactly what he had reported: a large abandoned bag. Inside was Araceli Ramos's body. She had been bound at the wrists and ankles with wire, partially undressed, wrapped in a sheet, and left in a fetal position. The discovery shocked the country. Authorities immediately reclassified the case as a homicide. Araceli's body was taken to the morgue for a full forensic examination to determine the cause of death and collect potential evidence. At the same time, Argentina's Ministry of Security issued a public statement. They confirmed that the Naval Prefecture had filed a criminal complaint against Walter for impersonating an active officer. Although expelled years earlier, he continued to wear the uniform, display unearned medals, and claim membership in elite tactical units. These actions constituted the crimes of usurpation of title and usurpation of authority under the Argentine Penal Code. The murder investigation advanced quickly. Walter was charged with unlawful deprivation of liberty, followed by aggravated homicide in Araceli's case, and with unlawful deprivation of liberty in the disappearance of Aida Amoroso, the elderly woman whose whereabouts were still unknown. Investigators believed Walter had killed Aida to seize her property. Another disturbing find emerged before his arrest. Walter had left his backpack at the antenna installation company where he occasionally worked. His employer turned it over to federal authorities. Inside, detectives found a USB drive containing dozens of documents and, most chillingly, a video recorded shortly before Araceli's death. In it, Araceli was alive but terrified, reading a script under duress. The recording refers to the unsolved murder of Veronica Celeste Fernandez, a 31-year-old escort. Veronica was killed on November 24, 2012. Her body, showing severe beatings and signs of asphyxiation, was found inside a bag on the Vicente Lopez Coastal Road. Though the case remained unsolved, investigators believe Walter staged the video to frame his ex-partner, Yanina, and 3 police officers who had previously arrested him. Detectives suspected a revenge scheme against those he viewed as enemies. Tricked into meeting him, Araceli was forced to recite the scripted lines. The video even included a warning: if anything happened to her, Her family should hold those individuals responsible. The revelation was devastating. Griselda could not understand why her daughter had been subjected to such cruelty. She stressed that neither she nor Araceli had any connection to Walter beyond the fake job interview. The community was shaken as well. Vigils, marches, and memorials intensified. Araceli's classmates canceled their graduation trip in mourning. Public outrage peaked when the video leaked, showing Araceli crying, terrified, and powerless. Likely in the final minutes of her life, the autopsy confirmed that Araceli was beaten and suffocated. Biological material found under her nails was sent for analysis. DNA samples from Griselda were used to confirm Araceli's identity, and investigators compared those findings with scratches on Walter's arms, consistent with a struggle. Additional forensic evidence strengthened the case. DNA from both Araceli and Walter was found on a glass seized from Aida Amoroso's home. Walter's genetic profile and fingerprints were also recovered from the property's toilet and bedsheets. Investigators additionally found a photograph of Araceli on one of Walter's devices. Combined with phone records, the video, location data, and Walter's indirect admissions, the case against him was overwhelming. Investigators concluded his motives were twofold: revenge against his ex-partner and the police officers who had crossed him, and financial gain by taking Aida's house. The theory held that after forcing Araceli to record the video and then killing her, Walter planned to fake his own death and flee abroad using money from the sale of a property. In November 2013, a judge in San Martin formally indicted him for unlawful deprivation of liberty and for murder committed to cover up another crime. He was placed in pre-trial detention at the General Alvear prison. In prison, Walter was kept in isolation due to conflicts with other inmates. During the investigation, authorities discovered he had hacked a San Martin police officer's email and sent himself a message he later tried to present as evidence of his innocence. This manipulation attempt also failed. Araceli Ramos's family joined the case as private complainants, demanding the maximum sentence. After years of preparation, the trial began on May 3, 2016. At 41, Walter again denied knowing Araceli and claimed the case was a conspiracy. He accused the police of destroying evidence and even suggested that traffickers of banned substances were responsible for her murder. Over 2 months, more than 70 witnesses, including experts and relatives, testified. The prosecution presented DNA results, records of Walter's communications with Araceli, the incriminating video, and a photograph found on his devices. Witnesses also testified that Walter had threatened someone during the proceedings. The evidence was overwhelming. On June 30, 2016, the San Martin Criminal Court found Walter Venado guilty and sentenced him to life imprisonment for the kidnapping and aggravated homicide of Araceli Ramos. Her mother, Griselda, one of the first witnesses to testify, burst into tears upon hearing the verdict. The court also found Walter guilty of unlawfully appropriating Aida Amoroso's property and held him responsible for her disappearance. Although Aida's body was never found, evidence showed Walter manipulated the elderly woman to gain control of her home. During the hearings, Aida's granddaughter, overcome with grief, shouted insults at him. Walter's defense appealed. But in March 2018, the Buenos Aires Court of Cassation upheld the life sentence. That same year, judges ordered a further investigation into his possible involvement in the murder of Veronica Celeste Fernandez. Questions also remained about the suspicious death of his former prison companion, Emilio Resonico, and whether Walter had ties to human trafficking networks. As of September 2025, Walter remains imprisoned in Buenos Aires province. He has shown no remorse and has given no information about the fate of Aida or other possible victims. His legal status is unchanged, and there are no reported steps toward conditional release. The case of Araceli Ramos stands as a stark reminder of how manipulation, vengeance, and gender-based violence can converge with deadly consequences. More than a decade later, her family, classmates, and Argentine society continue to honor her memory, not only as a tragedy, but as a call to strengthen protections for young people seeking opportunities, especially in the vulnerable environment of social media. Leslie Jennings Pryor's house was in a quiet neighborhood in Chevy Chase where crime was rare. But on the morning of May 2, 2001, when her husband and her boss pushed the door open and stepped inside, the scene within left them stunned into silence. The hallway was streaked with blood. Red footprints were trailing down the stairs. The bathroom door was ajar, and inside the tub, Leslie lay face down, motionless, her body pale and cold, as if the very life had been ripped from her in a fit of unprompted madness. There was no sign of forced entry, no crease for help, not a single item taken, just a scene scrubbed in desperation, and a killer gone like a ghost, leaving the haunting thought that he might still be out there somewhere and could return at any moment. Leslie had no enemies, no dark past, no reason to be killed, and that made it all the more terrifying. It took more than 2 decades for the truth to be revealed. Stay with us until the end of this video, because the killer was never far away. He knew her all along. Leslie Jennings Pryor was born on October 5, 1952, in Rhode Island. She was one of 8 children, and the family moved frequently because her father served in the Army. When Leslie was 12, they settled in Pensacola, Florida, where she finished school. She later attended the University of Florida to study journalism, where she met Carl Sandy Pryor. They married in 1974 when Leslie was 22, and 3 years later they had a daughter, Lauren. The family eventually moved to Chevy Chase, a suburb of Washington, District of Columbia, and Leslie worked at an advertising agency. Life was calm and routine for many years. On May 2, 2001, when Leslie was 48, she was expected at work by 10 o'clock a.m., but never arrived. Around 10:30 a.m., her boss grew concerned. Leslie had never missed work without calling. He contacted her daughter, Lauren, using emergency contact information, but she was away at college and had no information. He then calls Leslie's husband, Carl, who has also not heard from her. Carl said he left home at about 7:30 a.m. While Leslie was still getting ready, she usually left shortly after, walked to the bus stop, and took the bus into Washington, about a 1-hour commute. By 10 o'clock a.m., she should have been at the office. Carl tried calling the house, but no one answered. Alarmed, he drove back home. Leslie's boss did the same. They arrived around 11:30 a.m. and went inside. The front door was unlocked. The house was quiet, and red stains that looked like blood marked the hallway walls. Bloody footprints were on the floor. Leslie's boss immediately called 911 while Carl searched the house. He found their dog shut in the basement, but there was no sign of Leslie. The 911 operator instructed them to leave the house to avoid disturbing evidence, and they waited outside with the dog. Police arrived within minutes and searched the home. Upstairs, they found Leslie's body face down in the shower. Based on her position, detectives believed she had been killed elsewhere and then dragged into the shower. It appeared the killer intended to rinse the body and remove DNA. Crime scene technicians also found attempts to clean blood from the floor and doorways. More blood was located in the kitchen sink, the downstairs bathroom, and on the trash can. These details suggested the killer stayed for some time after the murder, trying to cover his tracks. Despite the cleanup efforts, there was blood throughout the house. One key detail stood out. The cleaning products used were not found in the home, suggesting the killer brought them, indicating premeditation. Even so, local police concluded they didn't have enough to immediately classify the case as a homicide. They waited for the coroner's report, leaving open the possibility of an accident, such as Leslie slipping while cleaning the bathroom, even though that theory conflicted with the evidence. As a result, the house was not processed as a murder scene. For instance, investigators never swabbed the blood on the doorframe. It was left untouched. News of Leslie's death spread quickly in the community, shocking residents in a town known for one of the lowest crime rates in the country, where murders were rare. The lack of information from the police made matters worse, fueling fear and speculation. 2 days later, the medical examiner completed the autopsy. The results were definitive. Leslie had been murdered. She suffered 7 head wounds from being slammed against a sharp, solide surface. Investigators later found that the injuries matched the sharp corners of the hallway baseboard. It appeared the attacker knocked her down and repeatedly struck her head against the floor. Her body also had multiple abrasions, consistent with a violent struggle, along with clear signs of strangulation. This confirmed the detectives' original theory: Leslie was attacked and killed in the hallway. The killer then dragged her body upstairs to the bathroom and tried to wash away the evidence. Forensics collected all possible blood samples from the house and sent them to the lab. With homicide confirmed, the real investigation began. While waiting for DNA results, detectives interviewed Leslie's family and friends. No one could name a single person who might want to harm her. She had no known enemies and avoided conflict. Investigators first focused on Leslie's husband, Carl. He said he left for work around 7:30 a.m., and a neighbor confirmed seeing him depart and waved to someone at the window. His co-workers verified he arrived on time and stayed until he received the call from Leslie's boss. This made the possibility of Carl being the killer low, unless the murder had occurred before he left for work. However, Carl had no scratches or bruises on him, which would have been impossible if he had been the one Leslie had fought back. Friends and family also described their marriage as happy and stable. Soon after, the lab results arrived. Forensics found foreign DNA mixed with Leslie's blood in 3 locations inside the house. They also recovered skin cells from under her fingernails, all pointing to the same unknown person. The DNA did not match anyone in the database, and it did not match Carl. Detectives collected DNA from several men who knew Leslie, but none matched. With no solid leads from the scene, the case stalled. Reconstructing the timeline, investigators estimated the killer had just over 2 hours to break in and commit the murder, attempt to clean up, and escape. Because the blood wasn't fully washed away, detectives considered that the killer might still have been inside when Leslie's boss and Carl arrived, possibly seeing them through a window and slipping out the back door. Lacking evidence or motive, police explored a possible connection to a series of local burglaries. That theory also dead-ended. Soon after, the county formed a special task force to review 6 unsolved murders in nearby towns that might be linked. Ultimately, investigators ruled out any connection. For months, the case went nowhere. Every new lead fizzled. The biggest challenge was motive. Nothing valuable was stolen, and there were no signs of a personal grudge. Leslie had no enemies. It seemed like a random, senseless killing. The case went cold for years with no progress toward an arrest. Some people continued to suspect Carl, believing he had outsmarted investigators. Lauren never believed him guilty and always supported him. In 2017, Carl died of natural causes. Lauren later said he died of grief, never knowing who had kidnapped his wife. In 2022, 21 years after the murder, the local police formed a cold case team and reopened the investigation. The killer's DNA still didn't match any profiles in the FBI database. Detectives re-examined the case, re-interviewed everyone involved, and appealed to the public for new information, all to no avail. Investigators then tried a different approach. They sent the DNA to a company specializing in genetic genealogy. In this process, an unknown DNA profile is compared against public genealogy databases, where people upload their own DNA results, looking for potential relatives and leads. In most cases, at least one relative appears, even if only a distant one. From there, experts build family trees and trace them toward the most likely suspect, narrowing the search by age, location, and other details. That's what happened here. The team soon identified a relative of the killer, a man living in Romania. The connection was distant, so it took 2 more years of researching family trees before they closed in on a viable suspect. By 2024, they had focused on a family living in Leslie's town at the time of the murder, the Glee family. The name rang a bell for detectives. Reviewing old case files, they found a tip submitted nearly a year after the murder that pointed to a man named Eugene Theodore Gligor, a former neighbor. They also learned that Eugene had been dating Leslie's daughter, Lauren, for about 5 years. The two had met in high school when they were both 15. Eugene lived a 10-minute walk from Lauren's house and spent a lot of time there. Lauren thought he was a great guy, but her father, Carl, never trusted him. He always said something felt off about Eugene, though he couldn't explain why. When they turned 20 and Lauren left for college, their relationship fizzled out and they eventually broke up cleanly. Eugen didn't seem bitter, and after that, Lauren barely kept in touch with him. Over the years, however, he was arrested multiple times for illegal weapons possession, theft, and drunk driving. It was odd, given that he came from a well-off family and had no reason to steal inexpensive items from people's homes. None of those charges required a DNA sample, which is why his profile never appeared in the FBI database. There was also a troubling incident from when Eugene and Lauren were 16. A woman was attacked by a teenager who matched Eugene's description. He denied it, and his friends couldn't imagine him doing such a thing. Lauren and a friend even went to the police station to vouch for him, insisting he was harmless. At the time of Leslie's murder, Eugene was 21. Detectives found another notable detail. 2 months after the killing, Eugene and his mother moved to Washington, District of Columbia. After that, he stayed out of trouble. Despite a neighbor tipping off police about him in 2002, detectives never actually questioned him about Leslie's case. Years later, a genealogical search flagged his name, making him the prime suspect. By 2024, Eugene was living in District of Columbia and working for a company that sold surveillance equipment. Investigators looked for a way to collect his DNA and learned he would return from Europe on June 9, 2024. They devised a simple plan with airport staff. A border officer pulled Eugene aside for what appeared to be a routine check. Nearby, several water bottles were placed on a table. Eugene took one, drank it, and later threw the empty bottle in the trash. Detectives immediately retrieved it and sent it to the lab. Forensic analysts swabbed the bottle and compared the DNA to genetic material found under Leslie's fingernails. It was a perfect match. This suggests that Leslie scratched Eugene during the attack, leaving his DNA under her fingernails. With that evidence, detectives finally had their suspect. A few days later, they arrested Eugene outside his apartment. During the interrogation, they started with basic questions. The last time he spoke to Lauren or her mother, Leslie, and whether he stayed at their house after the breakup. Eugene acted confused, as if he didn't know what they meant, and eventually asked for a lawyer. That's when the detective presented the evidence. Eugene's DNA was found inside Leslie's house. Eugene looked stunned and stammered that he had never given a DNA sample in his life. Eugene's voice trembled. He claimed he didn't remember anything and didn't know what to say. He became angry and demanded to know what was going on. The detectives reminded him that if he wanted a lawyer, they would have to pause the interview. Eugene muttered that he didn't know what to do and asked if he could call his girlfriend for help. He was visibly rattled. His hands trembled. His voice broke. And then he began to cry. He protested that they were treating him as guilty before a trial. But the detective noticed something strange. No tears were actually falling. He quickly replied that he was dehydrated and his eyes were too dry. Moments later, he spiraled into a full meltdown. He said his eyes were bloodshot from exhaustion and stress, claimed he didn't understand what was happening, accused the detectives of trying to frame him, and repeated that he couldn't remember anything. After the interrogation, detectives felt even more certain Eugene was guilty. His fake crying and shifting excuses only made him look worse. With a large amount of his DNA found at the scene, they didn't need a confession. He was charged with first-degree murder. The news shocked many friends and relatives who knew Eugene as harmless, upbeat, generous, charitable, and active in his community. But others weren't surprised. An ex-girlfriend said Eugene often flew into rages, threw objects, and punched holes in walls during arguments. His brother admitted he was afraid of Eugene and believed he could be violent. Lauren, however, was in disbelief. The idea that her ex-boyfriend had killed her mother was almost impossible to accept. She remembered running into Eugene shortly after the killing and telling him what had happened. He hugged her and quietly said that he was so sorry. Trial preparation took nearly a year, and by May 2025, prosecutors offered a plea deal. Eugene would plead guilty to second-degree murder instead of first-degree. Second-degree implied the killing wasn't premeditated and carried a maximum sentence of 30 years. Eugene accepted and admitted guilt. The catch: the plea didn't require him to explain what happened or why. To this day, no one knows his motive. Detectives pressed him for answers, but he refused to talk. Investigators have theories. The leading one is a burglary gone wrong. Eugene had been involved in previous robberies, and he knew Leslie's house well, making it an easy target. Perhaps he thought the house was empty but unexpectedly encountered Leslie. Because she knew him, he couldn't leave without being identified, and panic may have driven him to kill her. Still, this theory has gaps. There were no signs of forced entry, raising the question of how he got inside. One possibility is that he knocked, and because Leslie had known him for years, she opened the door. He could have attacked her in the hallway. But if robbery wasn't the motive, why did he do it? And if he planned to kill, why didn't he bring a weapon? Eugene's motive may remain a mystery unless he one day tells the truth. In late August 2025, he was sentenced to 22 years in prison and still offered no explanation. The police department also faced heavy criticism. The original investigators had a tip naming Eugene just a year after the murder, yet never contacted him. If they had collected his DNA in 2002, the case might have been solved decades earlier. Even so, the past can't be changed. This case also made history as Maryland's first solved through genetic genealogy, a method that has since helped crack hundreds of cases across the country. For 9-year-old Renesmee Utsi, the world should have been full of possibilities. She was a gentle, caring child who always wanted to help. Renesmee is just 2 meters tall, with long blonde hair and blue eyes, but suffers from intellectual disabilities that make her particularly vulnerable. Instead of being protected, that vulnerability was exploited by the very people entrusted with her care. When her frail body was pulled from the Euphiogheny River on September 4, 2025, weighing barely 45 pounds and bearing horrifying signs of prolonged abuse, it marked the tragic end of a life filled with unimaginable suffering. Christina Benedetto was only 16 when she gave birth to Renesmee. Benedetto and the baby's grandmother, Linda Miller, raised the little girl until she was 5 years old. But addiction took hold of Benedetto's life in her early 20s. Faced with an impossible choice, and believing she was doing what was best for her children, she made the heartbreaking decision to transfer legal guardianship to relatives. It was the hardest decision of her life. Benedetto said. Child Services said it was best to give Sarah Shipley and Courtney Utsi guardianship. Sarah was Benedetto's cousin by blood, while Courtney was related to Renesmee's biological father. They were not strangers. They were family. People Benedetto believed she could trust with the most precious thing in her world. In 2019, Renesmee, 5, moved into Sarah and Courtney's home on 3rd Street in Dunbar, Fayette County. Sarah Shipley was appointed the court-ordered custodian, while Courtney Utsi lived in the home as the day-to-day caretaker. For Benedetto, it was always meant to be temporary. She was working to get clean, to rebuild her life, and to become the mother her children deserved. But as the years passed, contact became harder and harder. Sarah stopped answering her. She would only reply if she needed money or when it was time to get the kids gifts. As of 2025, Courtney Utsi is also caring for Benedetto's 3 other children, ages 7, 4, and 2. What none of them knew was that behind the closed doors of that 3rd Street home, 4 vulnerable children were being systematically abused and cut off from the outside world. The place that was supposed to be safe had become something else entirely. None of the children were sent to school. They were kept away from teachers, doctors, social workers. District Attorney Michael Obele later described the situation as a systematic pattern of abuse involving one or more of the children in the home. These children were underweight and likely malnourished. For Renesmee, whose intellectual disabilities made her especially defenseless, the isolation was devastating. She could not fully understand what was happening to her or why. The little girl, once described as kind and helpful, was now trapped in what can only be called a house of horrors. The abuse was relentless. All of the children showed signs of mistreatment, but Renesmee bore the worst of it. She was severely underweight, covered in bruises, and had cigarette burns across her small frame, one burn on her back, inflicted during a bathtub incident about a week before her death, had been left untreated and became infected. District Attorney Obele asserted that abuse occurring within a household would be obvious to all members. He emphasized that a parent who witnesses abuse and fails to report it is as culpable as the abuser. However, in this case, there were no outside parties, such as teachers, doctors, or neighbors, who could have noticed and reported the abuse. Monday, September 1, 2025, began like any other day of cruelty inside the 3rd Street house. But for 9-year-old Renesmee, it would be her last day alive. Around 10:00 p.m. that night, one of the other children saw her for the final time, who would later recount the horror to investigators. The child awoke to the sound of Renesmee's screams and sobs coming from her room. Frozen in fear, the young witness saw both Courtney and Sarah shouting at Renesmee before kicking her hard in the stomach. When Sarah noticed the child watching, she struck the witness in the mouth, an unmistakable attempt to silence anyone who might speak out about the abuse. During this brutal assault, the witness overheard the adults threatening to take Renesmee to a river far away. A short time later, the child saw something that would remain seared into memory forever. Renesmee's small, lifeless body placed first into a black garbage bag and then shoved into a tote container. The witness recalled that Renesmee's lips had turned white, and she looked as though she were only sleeping. In her later confession to police, Courtney claimed that Renesmee had vomited and begun choking that night, possibly related to the infected burn on her back. She said she attempted CPR for 20 to 30 minutes, but Renesmee did not survive. Yet, given the witness testimony and the long-standing pattern of abuse, the true circumstances of Renesmee's final moments remain deeply disturbing. What is clear is that instead of calling for help or seeking medical attention, Courtney and Sarah chose to conceal her death and discard her body as though it were nothing. Although Renesmee died on the night of September 2, 2025, it was not until 12:41 p.m. the next day that Courtney and Sarah contacted the Pennsylvania State Police to file what they portrayed as a missing person report. They told officers that 9-year-old Renesmee had somehow wandered away from the house around 2:00 a.m., claiming they found her bedroom window slightly open. The false missing person report launched an enormous search operation. The Pennsylvania State Police deployed K-9 units, search and rescue teams, and established a command center in Dunbar Borough. Volunteers from the community joined the effort, dedicating countless hours to searching for Renesmee. Adding to the deception, Courtney even posted on Facebook, sharing a photo of Renesmee and begging for help. For 13 agonizing hours, Christina Benedetto searched desperately for her daughter, unaware that she would never see her alive again. She had already been kept from her children for years, and now she was searching in vain for a daughter who had been murdered by the very relatives she had once trusted to keep them safe. Bethesda evening, investigators began to spot inconsistencies in the story. Electronic data showed that Renesmee's device had pinged inside the residence at about 6:00 a.m. on September 3, contradicting the claim that she had left the house at 2:00 a.m. Surveillance footage likewise failed to match the timeline given by Courtney and Sarah. The real breakthrough, however, came from the children themselves. With courage that belied their age, the children disclosed that their foster mother had killed her sister and placed the body in a tote. During interviews with Child Protective Services, even more horrific details emerged. Despite their trauma and fear, the surviving children described the systematic abuse they had endured and witnessed, including the specific acts that preceded Renesmee's death. Faced with mounting evidence from surveillance footage, electronic data, and the brave testimony of the children, Courtney's story began to unravel. During a police interview late on September 3, she finally admitted elements of the truth. Early the next morning, Investigators located Renesmee's body partially submerged along the Yokyogeni River near Smithton. Her tiny frame bore the unmistakable signs of prolonged abuse. Courtney Melinda Outsey, 31, was arrested on September 4, 2025, and faces a wide array of charges reflecting the severity of the case: criminal homicide, 2 counts of aggravated assault, endangering the welfare of children, abuse of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and concealing the death of a child. At her arraignment, she was denied bail and ordered held at Fayette County Prison as a danger to herself and others. Sarah Shipley, 35. The court-ordered custodian, who investigators say participated in both the abuse and the cover-up, was also charged. On September 6, Sarah was hospitalized after attempting to overdose at her home. She was charged with murder, attempted murder, child endangerment, aggravated assault, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with physical evidence. According to the criminal complaint, Sarah helped carry the bag containing Renesmee's body to Courtney's vehicle before it was taken to the river. Hospital staff later told detectives Sarah was largely unresponsive verbally, but did nod when asked whether she had tried to kill herself because of what had happened to Renesmee. District Attorney Abele has said the investigation is ongoing and additional charges are possible. He also noted that another child from the household required medical attention after being removed from the home. Prosecutors expect the matter to proceed through grand jury review. For Cristina Benedetto, learning the truth about her daughter's murder has been an unbearable blow. The guilt of having placed her children with relatives she trusted, the years she was kept from them, and now the knowledge of how Renesmee suffered and died have left her grappling with an unimaginable loss. The betrayal cuts especially deep because the perpetrators were family, not strangers. Extended family members, including great-aunt Christine, have rallied together, demanding justice, while grappling with grief and frustration over the failures of the very systems that were supposed to protect Renesmee. Christine explained that the Renesmee Outsey case represents a catastrophic collapse across multiple layers of child protection. Failures occurred in placement decisions, oversight mechanisms, mandatory reporting, and interagency coordination. Perhaps the most glaring lapse was the complete lack of professional oversight. None of the children in the household were enrolled in school, eliminating one of the most important safeguards against abuse. Teachers, school nurses, counselors, and other school employees are required by law to report suspected neglect or abuse. They are trained to identify and respond to warning signs. Kinship care agreements add another layer of risk. When children are placed with relatives rather than strangers, agencies often assume the home is inherently safer, which can result in reduced monitoring. In this case, that assumption proved fatal. Renesmee's intellectual disabilities should have given her added protection, but instead, they made her even more vulnerable to those who chose to exploit her weakness. As legal proceedings move forward and the community struggles to heal, Renesmee's legacy must be one of reform. Her death was preventable, making it not only a criminal tragedy, but also a moral failure that demands systemic change. The little girl, who was once described as kind and eager to help, deserves so much more than the life of horror she endured. The case remains active in the courts. Both defendants have been formally charged and are currently awaiting trial. All information comes from official police statements, court documents, and verified news reports. Renesmee's death is a tragedy that should never have happened. It was the result not only of 2 women's cruelty, but also of the silence, neglect, and failures that surrounded her. While the justice system now seeks to hold Courtney Outsey and Sarah Shipley accountable, it is impossible to ignore the painful truth that her own mother, Cristina Benedetto, bears responsibility as well. From 2019 onward, she entrusted Renesmee to relatives, and by 2025, she had surrendered all 4 of her children into the same unsafe guardianship. Addiction and hardship may explain her choices, but they do not excuse them. A mother's duty is to fight for her children's safety, not to abandon them to environments where abuse could flourish unchecked. Renesmee was innocent. She deserved love, kade, and protection. Instead, she lived and died in terror. The failures of a broken system and the negligence of those closest to her converged in the most devastating way. As the courts deliberate and reforms are demanded, society must remember that responsibility extends beyond the abusers. It lies with every adult who failed to protect her, including her own mother. Only by facing this truth can Renesmee's short life, marked by suffering, become a call to action to ensure that no other child is betrayed so completely by both family and system. Emma Youngstig, Torgny Helberg, and their 2 children lived a peaceful life in their small house in Arboga. But that night, everything turned tragic in a way no one could have imagined. Emma's conversation with her sister suddenly ended, and just 13 minutes later, Torgny returned home to a horrifying scene: broken furniture, blood smeared across the walls, and 3 bodies lying motionless on the cold floor, their faces so brutally disfigured they were barely recognizable. No signs of forced entry, not a single scream for help. Only the dark shadow of someone once known turned love into hatred, and hatred into death. So who is the killer? Why did he want to destroy an innocent family? Watch until the end of the video, because the truth behind this massacre will send shivers down your spine. Emma Youngstig was born in Stockholm on February 16, 1985, and spent nearly all her childhood and adolescence there. She grew up in a modest family, together with her older sister, Katarina. At 19, Emma married Nicholas, her high school sweetheart. He was only slightly older than her, and at the time of their wedding, she was already pregnant. At 20, Emma gave birth to their son, Max. About a year and a half later, their daughter, Saga, was born. Despite having 2 children, they still struggled with the realities of family life. They argued frequently and couldn't find common ground. And shortly after Saga's birth, they decided to separate. The breakup led to a painful custody battle. Nicholas wanted not only to provide financial support, but also to be actively involved in raising the children. Emma did not object to his involvement, but soon she began a new relationship. She moved with the children to Arboga, a small town about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to live with her new partner. Nicholas opposed the move, wanting daily access to his children. They went to court several times to resolve the issue, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, something she immediately reported to the police. Unable to reach an amicable agreement, they sought sole custody of the child. At that time, Emma met her new partner Torgny Helberg online. They connected quickly and began dating. Torgny wasn't deterred by the fact that 23-year-old Emma already had 2 children. He had long wanted a family and was ready to accept them as his own. At first, they lived in a small house Torgny had inherited. When they decided to marry, they moved to a larger home where the children could each have their own room. At the time, Torgny had a good job with a solid income. Emma stayed home to care for Max and Saga and manage the household. Trained as a designer, she planned to work in her field later. They intended to marry in the summer of 2008, but those plans would never come to pass. On Monday, March 17, 2008, it began like any other day. Torgny left early for work, and Emma stayed home with 3-year-old Max and 1.5-year-old Saga. That evening, while preparing dinner and waiting for Torgny to return, Emma was chatting online with her sister, Katarina, about a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. Around 6:30 p.m., Torgny called to say he was delayed at work and that they could start dinner without him. After the call, Emma continued her chores, fed the children, and resumed her online conversation with Katarina. At 7:07 p.m., their chat suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Katarina found it strange. She could see Emma was typing, but no message was sent. 5 minutes later, concerned, Katarina called Emma, but there was no answer. She then called Torgny, who was driving home and nearing the house. He reassured Katarina that everything was probably fine. Emma was probably busy with the kids, and said she would call back soon. When Torgny reached the house, He noticed the front door was unlocked. Inside, he saw a mess he first assumed the children had made while playing. Then he spotted brown stains and smears on the floor and realized, with horror, that it was blood. He called out for Emma, Max, and Saga, but no one responded. In the hallway, Torgi saw something on the floor. At first he thought it was a doll because the body lay in an unnatural position. As he approached, he realized it was Saga, lying in a pool of blood. Her head and face were so badly mutilated that she was unrecognizable. A little farther away lay Max, also brutally injured, with a fractured skull. Emma was on the floor too, covered in blood and twisted into an unnatural pose. Her face was shattered and disfigured. None of them seemed to be alive. Shocked and trembling, Torgny called the emergency number. As he spoke, Emma suddenly shuddered and let out a long, loud groan. Police and paramedics arrived quickly. I found weak pulses in all three and began resuscitation. The scene was horrific. No one could imagine what kind of monster would do this to a young woman and her children. But the top priority was saving lives. So Emma, Max, and Saga were taken to the nearest hospital. At the hospital, the fight for survival began as the investigation started. From the start, the medical staff expressed doubts about whether Emma and her two children would make it to the hospital alive. However, all three were still alive when they arrived. Each had open head wounds, severe brain damage, and massive blood loss. The doctors offered no prognosis, only their best efforts. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if they survived, they were unlikely to breathe on their own again. Emma's condition was described as very serious but stable. She was placed in a medically induced coma and put on life support in the hope her body could recover. Meanwhile, forensic teams examined the scene, piecing together what happened. The house was in chaos, belongings scattered, blood on floors and walls. The medics, in their rush to save lives, had moved items and left footprints, complicating the evidence. Investigators now had to determine which prints belonged to responders and whether any belonged to the attacker. The timeline was chilling. The assault had to have occurred within a 13-minute window. Emma's last message to Katerina was sent at 7:07 p.m., and Torgny's call to the police came at 7:20 p.m. The brutality suggested a personal motive and deep hatred. The weapon appeared to be a heavy blunt object, likely a hammer. Used with extreme force, no such object was found, indicating the attacker took it. From the start, Torgny was the prime suspect. He was not the father of Max and Saga, so investigators believe a family dispute led to the deaths. He was questioned immediately, but his alibi was solid. He had been working late, as confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and at the likely time of the attack he was walking outside, captured by multiple CCTV cameras. Even so, Torgny was asked for a detailed statement. He remembered nothing unusual before discovering the scene, except that the front door was unlocked, suggesting Emma may have let the attacker in. After questioning, he was released. He had already informed Emma's family, and her parents rushed from Stockholm to Arboga. They drove straight to the hospital, but on the way they heard devastating news on the radio. Max and Saga had died of their injuries without regaining consciousness. The new suspect is Nicholas, Emma's ex-husband and Max and Saga's father. Although they had been divorced for over a year, their separation was far from peaceful. They constantly argued, fought over custody, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, something she reported to the police. The motive seemed to fit. After the breakup, Emma took the children, moved to another city to live with Torgny, and, unable to win custody, Nicholas might have lashed out in rage and murdered the children. Nicholas was quickly located and taken into custody. He appeared devastated by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, sobbing and repeatedly asking if there had been a mistake. When charged, he was first stunned, then insisted he would never harm the children he adored. When asked about his whereabouts during the time of the incident, he said he was in another city on a one-day business trip. It initially sounded suspicious, but his alibi was soon confirmed. He was 120 miles away from Emma and her children. Max and Saga, when the attack occurred, fearing for Emma's life and searching for clues. Forensic investigators continued to work the scene. The attacker had clearly worn gloves. No fingerprints were found. Shoe prints were harder to analyze because numerous medical personnel had entered the house to assist and remove the victims. Investigators now had to catalog all the footprints and eliminate those belonging to medics. Torgny, or the family, police fear the perpetrator. After learning that Emma survived, May tried to enter the hospital to commit murder. As a key witness, she could identify the attacker once conscious. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside her room. Meanwhile, officers canvassed the neighborhood. One woman reported seeing, around 5 p.m., a person dressed in black walking near Emma and Torgny's house. She couldn't see the face because of a hood, but thought the figure looked short and slight, possibly a woman. A similar hooded figure was captured by a street surveillance camera near a store a few minutes from the crime scene. Investigators also thought the person appeared to be a small, frail woman. But who is she? And why is she targeting Emma? Max and Saga. The footage was shown to Torgny for his opinion. From the first frames, he turned pale and said it might be his ex-girlfriend. 31 years old, Christine Schurer. Though he couldn't be certain. Christine Schurer was born in Hanover, Germany. In 1977, her father left when she was a child and largely cut off contact, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. She grew up strong-willed and driven, but difficult. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. She received a solid education in history and archaeology and traveled extensively across Europe, participating in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Crete, Greece, where she worked as a tour guide at a popular hotel. In July, 26 years old, Torgny arrived there on vacation and immediately attracted Christine. He, in turn, was drawn to her intelligence and charm, and they began an affair almost immediately. Christine was 29 at the time, but the small age difference didn't bother them. Their relationship lasted a week while he stayed at the hotel, and after he left, they continued to talk by phone and correspond online. A few months later, Christine showed up in Sweden and directly asked to stay at Torgny's house. Even then, her behavior seemed intrusive and tactless to him. When she invited him on a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and hoped it would be the last time they met. But she kept calling, writing, and pushing for another meeting. In January 2007, during a phone call, Torgny told her clearly that their relationship was over and they should not meet again. Christine ignored this. She continued to call, asking to visit him and inviting him to go on vacation with her. In spring 2007, Christine returned to Sweden and began to stalk Torgny. She tried to persuade him to renew their relationship, even though he honestly told her he was already seeing someone else. She then claimed she had left some belongings at his house on a previous visit and needed to retrieve them. Torgny agreed, but once inside, she tried to seduce him. When he firmly refused, she warned he would regret it. 3 months later, Christine returned, apologized for her behavior, and continued to beg Torgny to come back to her. He rejected her. That evening, she called to say she had taken pills because she didn't want to live without him. Torgny immediately called an ambulance and contacted her family, recounting the incident and advising them to take her to see a psychiatrist. After receiving emergency care, Christine's mother placed her in a psychiatric hospital, where she stayed for over a month. The treatment had little effect. Christine remained fixated on Torgny, constantly plotting ways to see him and win him back. In October 2007, Christine decided to move to Sweden and settled in a Stockholm suburb, sharing an apartment with another woman. She resumed pursuing Torgny. When she finally met him, she claimed she had given birth to his son and had placed the child with a foster family. Torgny was shocked, but primarily wanted to know when this had happened. Their last intimacy had been more than a year earlier, and they had met several times since without Christine showing any signs of pregnancy. She avoided direct answers and kept changing the details. In January 2008, after many failed attempts to meet, Christine messaged Torgny saying their son had been diagnosed with a hereditary disease and that they needed to travel to Germany together to see him. She added that the boy's adoptive father would call with details. At the time, Torgny and his partner, Emma, were moving to a new home. Emma knew the entire situation and believed Christine was trying to lure him to Germany, insisting there was no child. When a man called claiming to be the adoptive father, Torgny, following Emma's advice, asked specific questions: the child's birth date, the hospital, and other details. The caller grew irritated, dodged the questions, and then hung up. Torgny concluded there was no child and that Christine had invented the story, enlisting someone to play along. After learning of this, detectives quickly found Christine's address and went there. Her roommate said she had hurriedly packed her things the day before and said she was going back to Germany. Records confirmed she had left the country, so Swedish police requested assistance from their German counterparts to arrest her. On March 20, a warrant for her arrest was issued. When Christine was arrested, she insisted there had been a mistake and denied any involvement in the massacre. After being extradited to Sweden on March 29, she immediately asked to meet with Torgny, but the request was denied. She remained calm. Though she repeatedly asked to see or call him, police thoroughly searched Christine's rented apartment and seized her phone and laptop. They examined all her clothing and found no traces of blood. By that time, the investigators had determined which blood-soaked footprints at the scene did not belong to the medical personnel, Emma, or her children. The prints were athletic shoes. From the tread pattern, they determined the brand and style. The size matched Christine's. She claimed she had never owned that model, but her roommate identified the shoes as hers, contradicting her statement. Christine's laptop yielded even more troubling evidence. It contained numerous photos of Torgny, and both of them together, and of him alone or with Emma. In a separate folder with a disturbing title were photos of Emma, Max, and Saga that Christine had copied from Emma's social media. Christine had added captions to these images that were insulting, threatening, and frightening. The recovered search history included queries about committing murder without leaving evidence, hiding traces of a crime, and diverting suspicion. Investigators also found notes, a plan of Emma and Torgny's new home, Torgny's work scheduler, and details of the family's daily routine. At this point, Emma's condition was stable, and her vital signs had improved. Toward the end of March, doctors began bringing her out of a medically induced coma. At first, she could not speak due to the breathing tube, but her gaze was responsive. She recognized the relatives present. However, she did not understand what had happened or why she was in the hospital. As soon as she could speak clearly, police arranged to interview her, but chose not to tell her what had happened to Max and Saga. Emma had no memory of the day of the attack and assumed she had been in a car accident. She repeatedly asked about Max and Saga and whether they were safe. Initially, her family and medical team gave evasive answers, but eventually they decided not to withhold the truth. When Emma was told that her children had died, she became hysterical. Doctors had to sedate her. Upon waking, she did not remember the conversation and asked about the children again. This cycle continued for several weeks. Each time she was told of their deaths, her mind seemed to refuse the information, erasing it anew. About a month later, Emma, accompanied by medical staff, returned to the house. Once inside, her memory suddenly returned. She recalled texting with Katerina while setting the table as the children played nearby. There was a knock at the door. She opened it to see a short, dark-clothed woman on the threshold. When Emma asked what she wanted, she felt a sharp pain and everything went black. The figure slipped into the house. Desperate, Emma tried to follow to protect her children, but collapsed in the hallway, where the attacker tried to finish her off. Christine continued to deny involvement. The murder weapon was never found, and most of the evidence was circumstantial, which gave her a chance of avoiding conviction. However, her roommate told investigators that a hammer had gone missing from her toolkit in March. She provided the toolkit, and investigators determined that a tool of that brand, size, and configuration matched the likely murder weapon, though this 2 was circumstantial. Detectives also obtained surveillance footage from a suburban bus station showing Christine traveling to Arboga 3 times in the week before the crime. She could not explain these trips, though it appeared she was surveilling Emma, nor could she explain her internet searches on covering up a crime or her collection of photos of Emma, Max, and Saga. On July 29, 2008, Christine's trial began. She was charged with 2 counts of murder with particular cruelty and 1 count of attempted murder. Her behavior in court was unsettling. She entered smiling and waving, and when questioned about the massacre, while being shown graphic footage of the mutilated victims, she suddenly laughed. Although this behavior suggested possible insanity, a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation concluded she was fully sane and aware of her actions. She appeared to take pleasure in what she had done and made no effort to conceal it. When Emma saw Christine in the courtroom, she fainted. After regaining consciousness, she said she finally remembered everything and that Christine's face was the last thing she saw on the day of the crime. Despite the defense's efforts to establish Christine's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all charges. She received a life sentence without the possibility of release and was ordered to pay Emma 20,000 euros in compensation. Investigators also found no evidence that Christine had ever been pregnant or had a child with Torgny. As for Emma, her recovery was long and difficult, but she remained by Torgny's side. They married in the summer of 2010. They are currently raising 2 children. In the town of Bradford, Ohio, amid endless fields, Jack and Linda Myers' 40-acre farm once stood as a model of the ideal family. It seemed like nothing could shake their lives until one fateful morning, a 4-year-old boy walked into kindergarten, covered in blood, and said his grandparents had melted. Soon after, the police arrived at the home where the boy lived with his grandparents and were shocked to find 2 bodies lying motionless on the bed. Blood staining the sheets. Everything pointed to a cold, carefully planned murder, as if the killer knew every corner of the house and the habits of the victims. As the community was thrown into confusion, the investigation revealed a shocking twist. The killer may not have been a stranger. The crime scene, the child's fragmented account, and the shadow of a green monster looming in the night all point to an unthinkable possibility that the shooter may have been a relative. Watch until the end of the video. The truth behind this tragedy is not only cruel, but also a terrifying testament to how greed can turn a family into hell. Jack and Linda Myers live on a 40-acre farm in the small town of Bradford, Ohio. Họ đã sống chung với nhau 10 năm và kết hôn được 7 năm. Linda's daughter, Amber, and became pregnant as a teenager and gave birth to a baby boy named Damien in late 1998. Despite the difficult circumstances, Jack and Linda calmly accepted, supported Amber wholeheartedly, and cared for the baby. From the beginning, Jack and Linda took care of Damien, took care of everything for him, and then agreed to raise him as their own child. They believed that education was the key to Amber's future and wanted her to have the opportunity to be independent. Jack and Linda are respected by the community, not only for that kindness, they are energetic people who succeed at whatever they do. Close-knit, loving family, and that also supports the business. They ran a small pizza shop in the town center. Linda also bought and sold cars. Jack owned rental properties, including real estate and cars. By 2003, when they were both in their 52nd, their lives seemed very stable. Amber was now grown up, married, but still in college. By this time, Amber had grown up, gotten married, but was still attending university. She gradually became financially stable, lived separately from her husband, and was able to take care of her son, Damien. The plan was for Damien to move in with her that summer. Since Amber lived only about a 30-minute drive from the farm, they expected to remain close to Jack and Linda. Everything was going well until March 27, 2003, when things took a sudden turn. At 9:15 a.m., a preschool teacher called 911, alarmed that a 4-year-old boy had arrived at the preschool alone, covered in blood. The boy was Damien, who lived about a kilometer away at his grandparents' farmhouse. The teacher was confused because the boy was bloody but not injured. Damien said his grandparents had melted away, and the school could not reach them by phone. The teacher asked the police to support. Based on the information, the dispatcher sent police to both the kindergarten and the farm where Jack and Linda lived. An officer at the preschool confirmed the blood on Damien's clothing, but found the child uninjured. Detectives arriving at the farmhouse found the front door wide open. Entering with weapons drawn, they called out but received no response. In the master bedroom, they discovered Jack and Linda lying on the bed, covered in blood and unresponsive. Jack had a gunshot wound to the back of his head and was bleeding from his nose and mouth. Both bodies were cold with no pulse, and a large amount of blood indicated they had been dead for some time. The medical examiner later estimated the time of death at around 5 a.m. A room-by-room search confirmed no one else was in the house. Evidence suggests that both Jack and Linda were shot at close range while sleeping. It is likely that Jack was shot first, then Linda, as she may have tried to stand up. The shooter remained at large. It was surprising that 2 gunshots had not awakened Damien, but that likely spared his life. After officers spoke with Damien, they placed him in protective custody. He was kept hidden, even from his family, which caused more trauma for him and his mother, Amber. Police wanted a more thorough interview to clarify key details, but their top priority was protecting him from the still unknown perpetrator, who could return at any time. Investigators believed Damien was the only witness who could provide valuable information. A detective went to Amber's home to deliver the tragic news. She was desperate to see her son and feared he might also be hurt, but she was assured he was safe in protective custody. She cooperated fully, even though she had no idea who wanted to harm her family. Meanwhile, the attack on Jack and Linda's home became public. Media coverage was intense but cautious, as speculation was already rampant. Neighbors and acquaintances suspect their business dealings may be linked to the case. Jack's real estate and car ventures, selling and renting properties and vehicles, could have created resentment. Evictions and foreclosures often leave people feeling wronged, even when justified. However, the investigation did not support these theories. After TV reports aired, many people contacted police with tips, but most leads were complicated or unhelpful. One stood out. A neighbor reported seeing an unfamiliar van in the area at 4:40 a.m. On March 27, forensic teams processed the crime scene. By tracking the pellets' trajectories, they identified where Linda and Jack were when they were shot. Both were taken by surprise. Evidence of forced entry in the basement suggested a targeted attack. It is clear that the perpetrator may have known Jack and Linda. They understood the home security well enough to enter through the basement without triggering alarms. Something only someone close to the family would likely know. No fingerprints were found, indicating the killer probably wore gloves. Small shoe prints were discovered, raising the possibility that the shooter could have been a teenager or a slight adult. Initially, police considered a burglary gone wrong. That theory was quickly dismissed. Cash, jewelry, and bank cards were left untouched throughout the house. This was not unusual for Jack and Linda, who were wealthy and ran successful businesses. They had no financial issues. Aside from their valuables remaining intact, Jack and Linda had no chance to defend themselves or confront the robber. Investigators concluded this was a planned double murder. The calculated, cold-blooded nature of the attack suggested a personal motive. It seemed highly unlikely that a random stranger would break in before dawn and shoot sleeping victims without reason. Behavior uncommon, even among serial offenders. The security system being disabled further strengthened the investigation's focus on people who knew Jack and Linda. Police learned Jack had 2 adult sons from a prior marriage, 25 years old Greg Myers and 28 years old Travis Myers. They grew up with Jack, Linda and her daughter, Amber, forming one large family. A neighbor said both sons, Greg and Travis, had strained relationships with their father. Jack. This gave both potential motives. However, others disagreed, describing the brothers as friendly and close to their family. At Jack's wedding to Linda, Greg was best man. Both were known as polite and well-mannered. They had spent much of their childhood on the family farm and were familiar to all the neighbors. While Greg and Travis seemed unlikely, suspects with no recent major conflicts, the theory involving them still warranted careful consideration. A neighbor told police that Greg was in serious financial trouble and had argued with Linda and Jack several times. He appeared unsympathetic toward Linda, while Jack was worried about his son's incompetence and ongoing issues. As a result, both Greg and Travis were interrogated separately. From the moment Greg entered the station, detectives noted that he was extremely distressed. He said his emotions were tied to the tragedy. Investigators focused on his whereabouts early that morning when the crime occurred. Greg claimed he had slept through the night and left early for work. He stayed composed and did not raise strong suspicions. Travis also appeared upset during questioning but gave a solid alibi, saying he had worked all night and by morning, about 50 kilometers from the family farm. To support this, Travis provided a manager-certified timesheet that convincingly confirmed his alibi. Investigators had found shoe prints at the scene, so they checked Travis's footwear. It turned out the boy was wearing shoes 2 sizes too big, which did not match the shoe prints at the scene. These details reduced suspicion against him. The boy was fully cooperative, expressing a strong desire to help and find the person who attacked his parents. He calmly agreed to take a lie detector test, passed it, and consented to a search of his home. Nothing suspicious was found. It seemed like a dead end. However, they did not completely rule out Greg. Although his shoe size did not match the shoe prints at the scene, the police then decided to speak with 4-year-old Damian, who had finally regained consciousness and recovered from the initial shock. They wanted to learn what he saw and heard the night and morning his grandparents were shot. Damian said he woke early on March 27, 2003. After hearing an unusual noise, opening his eyes slightly, he looked into the hallway and, to his horror, saw a large green figure. Frightened, he pretended to be asleep, hoping the monster would go away. And it did. He fell back asleep and later woke up on his own. This surprised the boy, because his grandmother, Linda, usually woke him up to go to kindergarten. Worried he was late, he checked his watch and realized it was past time to go to school. He called out to his grandparents but got no response. He ran to their bedroom and found both of them lying on the bed, their bodies in the sheets covered in blood, too young to understand death. He referred to the blood as melted, not realizing it was fatal bleeding. Sensing something was wrong, Damian took a napkin and tried to wipe away Jack's maternal grandfather's blood, but there was too much blood, and he only soiled himself. Realizing he needed adult help, he tried to call emergency services. His grandparents and mother had taught him to dial 911, and they had practiced it many times. But when he dialed, the line was silent. Investigators later discovered the phone lines had been cut. He didn't know how to use the family's cell phone, so he decided to go to the only place he knew well, his kindergarten. Damian left the house and walked about 1 kilometer on his own. He had never made the trip on foot, but after riding there almost daily with his grandparents, he knew the general direction. When he arrived, his unexpected, solitary appearance and disheveled state immediately drew the teacher's attention. The attacker made sure Jack and Linda couldn't call for help by shooting them in the head and cutting the telephone lines, virtually ensuring their deaths. He avoided a struggle and left Damian unharmed. However, detectives found inconsistencies in Damian's account. A search of the farmhouse revealed significant bloodstains, including in the hallways and at the entrance to Damian's bedroom. Because Damian was only 4 years old and had limited understanding, detectives believe he may have forgotten or overlooked important details. To help him recall events, they built a model of the farmhouse and used dolls and toys. Damian eagerly participated, reconstructing the sequence and clarifying some circumstances. He also gave a clearer description of the intruder who entered his room, a large figure in a green jumpsuit holding a weapon. He could not see the person's face. Meanwhile, investigators focused on those close to Jack and Linda. interviewing dozens of people, business partners, employees, relatives, neighbors, and friends. One name kept coming up: Greg, Jack's youngest son from his first marriage, previously considered a suspect. A neighbor reported that Greg had recently asked where he could buy a gun. Suspicion grew as investigators learned Greg had serious financial problems. He had lost his home after falling months behind on rent, and his landlord was preparing eviction papers. Greg asked his wealthy father for help, but Jack refused, not out of greed, but because he wanted his son to learn responsibility and independence. At 25, Greg was seen as immature and unable to handle basic adult responsibilities. He struggled to keep jobs and squandered money, including on alcohol and banned substances. Jack wanted to help only if Greg showed real change and stability. Everyone knew Greg couldn't fix his financial troubles quickly, while his parents were financially secure, suggesting a possible financial motive. It may have seemed odd that no money was taken from the house, but theft wasn't necessarily the goal. Anything inside the home would likely come to Greg through inheritance anyway. The real prize, investigators believed, was the house itself. Still, investigators needed evidence linking Greg to the crime. They looked for missing items from the scene, especially the 12-gauge shotgun used in the murders. Notably, Jack and Linda did not own a handgun of that caliber. Police reviewed Greg's movements on the day of the killings. His route from home to work passed by Jack and Linda's farm. His girlfriend confirmed he left around 4 o'clock a.m. The reconstructed timeline showed he could have stopped at the farm, killed Jack and Linda, and still arrived at work on time. Given his limited window, he likely disposed of evidence somewhere along his route. After a week of analyzing possible paths, detectives focused on the Stillwater River, about 5 kilometers from the farmhouse, directly along the likely escape route. Although the shallow, calm water seemed an unlikely dumping spot, they searched it anyway. To their surprise, they found a 12-gauge shotgun in the shallows beneath the bridge. Ballistic tests strongly suggested the pellets had been fired from that weapon. Precision was limited because no shell casings were recovered. The shooter had removed them. The serial number had also been filed off, making it harder to trace the gun's owner. However, recovering the serial number was not too difficult. After finding it and checking the database, investigators tracked down the previous owner of the gun. They discovered she had sold it just days before tragedy struck the Myers family. Police then went to the home of the couple who had previously owned it. The woman who made the sale immediately identified the buyer. She even wrote his name and personal details on a piece of paper for the officers. It listed Greg Myers, the prime suspect. Moreover, Greg owned the same model of van that a neighbor reported seeing around the time of the murders. Despite his careful planning, he overlooked several details that tied him to the crime. The most troubling suspicion was confirmed. The shooter who killed Jack and Linda could indeed be Jack's son. This devastated the Myers family and their friends. A double murder would clearly benefit Greg. Jack's life insurance named him as the beneficiary, and when Jack and Linda passed away, he would inherit the farm, the business, and the entire estate, instantly solving his financial problems. This gave the police a clear motive and a reason to bring Greg back to the interrogation room. This time, detectives were blunt, focusing on his potential inheritance and money problems. Greg denied everything, and at that point the case was still mostly circumstantial. To charge him with first-degree murder, investigators needed stronger evidence, or a confession. Without direct proof, a conviction would be difficult, and the killer would likely walk free. Detectives returned to the site where the rifle had been found and searched the surrounding area more thoroughly, hoping the perpetrator had dumped more evidence nearby. About a kilometer downstream, they discovered a large, tied package in some bushes. Inside were several items that immediately appeared connected to the double homicide, including a green jumpsuit matching Damien's description. The bag also contained 12-gauge shell casings. Ballistics confirmed they had all been fired from the rifle pulled from the river. There was also a pair of shoes 2 sizes smaller than Greg's, the same size as the shoe print found at the crime scene. The most important items were latex gloves. The outer surfaces were clean, But forensic analysts examined the insides and found a partial fingerprint on the right index finger. The print matched Greg Myers. With this, police were able to connect all the evidence. They arrested Greg and charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial was set for April 2004. Despite the strong case against him, Greg pleaded not guilty. Lengthy interrogations and various tactics failed to break him. But the prosecutor remained confident. At the hearing, the courtroom was filled with Jack and Linda's relatives. Some struggled to accept what had happened, remembering Greg as the son who sat at the family table and seemed loving and decent. In court, he showed no remorse. Family members, especially Amber, tried to meet his eyes, but he never looked at anyone. The defense argued that much of the case was circumstantial and pointed to the mismatch in shoe sizes, but the prosecution's case was strong. Even setting aside circumstantial elements, there was damning physical evidence. The prosecutor highlighted the killer's meticulous preparations, including wearing shoes 2 sizes too small to mislead investigators. Though this did not erase suspicion, multiple witnesses testified about Greg's conflicts with his father and stepmother. Forensic findings supported their accounts. The prosecution presented a clear, compelling case, and on April 27, 2004, the jury took only a few hours to find Greg Myers guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. Despite the verdict, some of Myers' family members insisted he had been framed and refused to believe he committed the crimes. Greg remains in prison. His lawyer filed multiple appeals, all of which were denied. Damien's nightmares continue. According to his family, Damien was haunted for years by nightmares about a green monster. These dreams faded only as he grew older. With time, he came to understand the gravity of Greg's actions and remembered Jack and Linda as loving grandparents who did not deserve such a tragic end. After the public attention surrounding the murders subsided, Damien reunited with his mother. As Amber had planned before the tragedy, he moved in with her and started attending a new kindergarten. Slowly, the family began to heal. In later interviews, a grown Damien said he felt a responsibility to carry forward the legacy of the grandparents who had given him so much. He aimed to become a good man and a source of pride for his family. Damien eventually became a dealer, moved to a nearby town, and started a new life. Sarasota, Florida, a peaceful, safe, family-friendly city where life was calm and easygoing. But on November 7, 1997, that peace was torn away forever. Inside a suburban home, a brutal crime occurred that shocked the community. The victim was Sheila Belush, 35 years old. She was found dead, lying face down. Her right leg straight, her left bunt. Her lower face and chest bore fatal wounds. A haunting, bloody scene. But the most haunting detail was not the crime itself, but the children, not yet able to speak, crawling through their mother's blood, screaming in despair. Who was the killer? Why did he target Sheila, a devoted mother who loved her family dearly? Whoever the killer is, they have a clear objective: to kill Sheila. And what began as a seemingly enduring mystery soon unfolded into a shocking tale of betrayal, greed, and cold-blooded cruelty. Sheila Belush was born on October 19, 1962, in Topeka, Kansas. From a young age, she was known for her striking looks, and more importantly, her relentless determination. She never backed down from challenges, and people admired her resolve. After high school, she worked as a receptionist at a law firm, but her ambitions stretched far beyond the front desk. She dreamed of a life built on love, stability, and success. That dream seemed within reach when she met Alan, a man who appeared to be everything she wanted. Alan was attractive, polite, articulate, and charming. Their relationship moved quickly. After just 3 dates, he proposed, swept up in the romance. Sheila said yes. They married in 1982 and settled in Salem, Oregon. They soon had 2 daughters, Stevie and Daryl. From the outside, their life looked ideal. But Sheila didn't yet see the truth behind Alan's carefully crafted image. Born on June 5, 1955, in Eugene, Oregon, Alan had grown up with a single mother who was deeply unstable and violent. His childhood was brutal. His mother once beat him with a stick, breaking his cheekbone and fracturing his ribs. In another horrifying incident, she doused him with gasoline and tried to set him on fire. Those experiences left deep physical and emotional scars and helped shape him into a man driven by bitterness, deceit, and a need for control. Sheila believed she had married a dependable partner, but after the wedding, Alan's behavior told a different story. He was ambitious, but his ambition was fueled by greed. He planned to build a chain of electronics stores and created an impressive-looking business proposal, confident and persuasive. Alan took the plan to Sheila's father, Francis Anthony Walsh. Francis, impressed by his son-in-law's confidence, invested everything. His savings and even properties transferred into Alan's name, trusting the venture would grow the family's wealth. But all the promises quickly fell apart. Instead of investing, Alan spent lavishly, eating at fancy restaurants, buying expensive suits, living beyond his means. Within a year, the business failed. The Francis family went bankrupt. Their savings depleted. Sheila was devastated. She had trusted Alan, and he had ruined her family. Still, she stayed with him. Her loyalty gave him a chance to start over. The family moved to San Antonio, Texas, for a fresh start. There, Alan reinvented himself. Even changing his last name to Blackthorne, he launched a new business selling muscle stimulation devices at steep markups, targeting wealthy clients, especially doctors. He thrived. Charismatic and persuasive, he won over even skeptical buyers. In a short time, he rebuilt his fortune, indulging in luxury cars, designer shopping, and the lifestyle he'd always wanted. But the marriage was falling apart. Sheila could no longer ignore Alan's darker side. His need for control extended to their personal life, where his unusual demands for intimacy created growing tension. Sheila, the strong, determined woman who once loved Alan, begins to constantly think about escaping. Divorce shifted from a distant thought to her only path forward. Alan didn't seek intimacy. He sought domination, humiliation, and pain. He pursued elaborate, power-driven encounters with other women and demanded that Sheila watch. At first, she complied, hoping to save the marriage for her family's sake. But over time, the emotional strain became unbearable. The confident, vibrant woman, she had been faded into someone anxious, fearful, and deeply unhappy. Sheila eventually left the marital bedroom, unable to endure Alan's demands any longer. Her withdrawal enraged him, and the abuse escalated. What began as verbal cruelty turned violent. On one occasion, Alan forced her head into a toilet, attempting to drown her. On another, he beat her severely. Sheila reported these attacks to the police, not yet realizing that Alan had a history of similar abuse in past relationships. He had been married before, and both ex-wives suffered the same pattern of cruelty. In 1987, after 5 tumultuous years, Sheila reached her breaking point. They divorced, but the split launched a decade of legal warfare, custody battles over their daughters. Daryl and Stevie grew vicious, with each side accusing the other of abuse, neglect, and exploitation. Even after both remarried, the hostility continued. In 1993, Sheila found happiness with salesman Jamie Belushi. They married and moved to Sarasota, Florida, hoping to escape Alan's toxic influence. 2 years later, Sheila gave birth to quadruplets. Sometimes it seemed as if the stormy past had receded into the distance. But Alan did not let go. Losing custody of his daughters infuriated him, and watching Sheila build a new life only deepened his obsession. He hires a private investigator to search for Sheila's family in Florida. Once he had their address, he began plotting revenge. He confides in Daniel Rocha, a golfing buddy, a petty criminal struggling to support his family, who admires his wealth and status. Daniel looked up to Alan and agreed to help. Alan lied, claiming Sheila was abusing their daughters and needed to be punished. At first, he said he just wanted to hit Sheila, but soon he changed his mind. He wanted to kill her. Daniel knew people who would take such a job. With $14,000, he found a hitman willing to act, Jose Luis del Toro. On November 7, 1997, Jose drove to Sarasota in a car borrowed from his grandmother. Along the way, he stopped at a sporting goods store to buy camouflage clothing and later at a gas station to ask for directions. Jose eventually arrived at Sheila's house. He broke in, waiting with a gun in his hand, watching her tend to her children. For a moment, he hesitated. Sheila didn't resemble the abuser Alan described. She looked like a devoted mother amid the chaos of toddlers. Doubt crept in, and he considered leaving until Sheila saw him and screamed. He fired reflexively. The .45 caliber bullet struck her in the face, and she collapsed on the kitchen floor. To ensure she was dead, he grabbed a knife from the counter, stabbed her, and fled. He left behind a horrific scene. 6 children, 4 of them infants, crying and crawling through their mother's blood. The investigation moved quickly once detectives found key evidence. Jose made a mistake. Biological traces at the scene provided forensic leads, and a vigilant neighbor had written down the license plate of a suspicious car, an act that proved crucial. Jose fled to Mexico, but authorities tracked him down. He was captured and deported to the United States. In July 1999, Jose Luis del Toro pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and armed burglary. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. As investigators reconstructed the plot, more names surfaced through interrogations and court records. Jose's cousin, Sammy Gonzalez, cooperated with authorities and explained how the plan came together. He had recruited Jose for the killing, and his testimony implicated others. Court documents and subsequent guilty pleas revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Sammy Gonzalez ultimately pleaded guilty to solicitation of murder and was sentenced to 19 years in prison. But investigators didn't stop with the hired killer and the recruiter. Documents, witness statements, and evidence uncovered during the investigation led them to the man who had driven the plot, Alan Blackthorne, whose fixation on revenge set everything in motion. Alan consistently denied involvement, but the evidence told another story. Testimony described him as consumed by anger over his ex-wife Sheila's new life and the loss of custody of their children. Witnesses said he recruited acquaintances, promised money, and pushed for retaliation that escalated from threats to murder. Alan was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and domestic violence. Like Jose, he received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole and was sent to a federal prison in Beaumont, Texas. Daniel Rocha, a friend and golfing partner who linked Alan with willing accomplices, was also ensnared. Described as a small-time criminal who admired Alan and needed money, Daniel was convicted for arranging the plot and received a life sentence without parole. The court determined the crime was not random but the result of a calculated conspiracy fueled by bitterness and ending in brutality. Throughout the trials, testimony revealed the motives and methods, offers of payment, promises of rewards, and discussions about killing Sheila so that they could transfer custody of the children. Witnesses recounted talks about money and logistics, while the profound loss suffered by the children remained at the heart of every proceeding. Sheila was murdered, leaving 6 young children and a grieving family. Alan's motive was stark and toxic: rage, humiliation, and the need to control. After Sheila divorced him, won custody of their daughters, and built a new life in Florida with Jamie and their quadruplets, Alan saw her happiness as an unforgivable betrayal. He could not accept her independence or that she had moved on. In his mind, revenge was the only answer. For orchestrating the murder-for-hire plot, Alan received 2 life sentences without parole. Prison, however, did not end the turmoil. In 2001, he was attacked by a prison gang and barely survived, prompting authorities to transfer him for his safety. On November 18, 2014, at age 59, Allen died in federal custody. The cause of death was never publicly disclosed. The heaviest burden of his actions fell on Sheila's children. When Sheila was killed in 1997, her daughters with Allen, Stevie and Daryl, were just 13 and 11. Her 4 quadruplets with her second husband, Yamia Belush, are all just 2 years old. After her death, Jamie shouldered the enormous responsibility of raising all 6 children. With help from extended family, he worked to give them stability and guide them through the years of grief that followed. Over time, the children grew and found their own paths. Stevie, now in her late 30s, is noted for her strength and resilience, building a meaningful life and giving back through community work. Her story reflects perseverance. Daryl and the quadruplets have chosen privacy, focusing on healing away from public attention. Though Sheila's life ended in a senseless act of violence, those who knew her remember her warmth, kindness, and determination. She was a devoted mother who faced enormous challenges without wavering in her love for her children. Her legacy lives on in them, in their survival, growth, and resolve to move forward despite their unimaginable loss. In July 2009, 55-year-old Gloria Huerta Marmolejo vanished without a trace from her home in El Paso, Texas. The day before she disappeared, she had returned unexpectedly from a trip and discovered something inside her house that she had likely suspected for some time. Just hours later, all contact with her was lost. No calls, no messages, no signs. When her son suggested that she might have gone away for a while, the rest of the family grew worried. Gloria was not the type to leave without telling anyone. A few days later, her car was found abandoned, and her belongings had been neatly left at home. What began as an ordinary missing person case soon unraveled into a chilling story of hidden relationships, a double life, and a betrayal that turned deadly. El Paso lies in the far western corner of Texas, right along the border with Mexico. The city is known for its blend of cultures, its tense border atmosphere, and its relatively high crime rate. Yet despite that reputation, generations of families have built their lives there, holding tightly to traditions, loyalty, and the Sunday gatherings that keep everyone connected. It was here, on July 28, 1955, that Gloria Marmolejo was born. She grew up in a large, close-knit family of Mexican heritage, where values of support, family ties, and loyalty were passed down through the years. In the early 1970s, Gloria met Armando Marmolejo. He quickly won her heart, and on October 11, 1975, they were married. Gloria poured herself into the relationship, never allowing anyone to speak poorly of her husband and always standing by his side. Together they had 2 sons, first Manny Marmolejo, then David Marmolejo a few years later. At first, their family life appeared stable. A home, children, holidays, and the everyday rhythm of life together. But after David was born, Armando took a job that supposedly required constant travel. He was home less and less, until he seemed to vanish almost entirely. No one really knew what he was doing or where he was going. His business trips were shrouded in secrecy. Even relatives were left in the dark. By the time David was around 6, their father was rarely present. In April 1995, Gloria finalized the divorce. Armando moved out of state, cut off contact with Manny and David. Gloria did not let this break her spirit. She accepted the situation and focused on raising her sons, According to her brother, she had a unique relationship with each of them, tailored to their personalities and needs. As Manny and David grew older, they began to drift apart, each following his own path. Manny settled into a steady routine, while David often shifted his direction. After years of dedicating herself to family, Gloria eventually refused to let loneliness consume her. At 50, she made a bold change. She left her job of 27 years, went back to school, and earned a degree in management. She became a real estate agent, a career that gave her not only income, but also a renewed sense of purpose. It offered flexible hours and the chance to take control of her own time. Life soon settled into a comfortable rhythm. Gloria's home was tidy and well kept. With a garden she loved to care for, she spent her days reading, enjoying the outdoors. Seemed to have finally found the peace she had long sought. But everything changed abruptly. One of Gloria's longtime neighbors, an elderly man she had known for years, became seriously ill. His adult son moved in to care for him. After his arrival, Gloria began noticing unsettling things. She often saw someone watching her from behind the bushes that bordered their yards. The man would hide, never coming too close, but his stare felt invasive and disturbing. Once, she even saw him holding what looked like a phone or a camera, apparently recording her. This wasn't an isolated incident. It happened again and again. The sense of security Gloria had always felt in her home was gone. She tried not to panic, but the tension kept growing. Despite this, she never went to the police. Part of her held back out of compassion for her ill neighbor, worried that involving authorities might make things worse. Another part of her thought it best to wait, to observe, and to avoid making any sudden moves. Instead of calling the police, she reached out to her brother Mark Huerta. She explained what was happening and shared her growing anxiety. She asked him to stay in touch in case things escalated. While she didn't want to create unnecessary drama, she thought it was important for him to be informed. After that call, the idea of moving began to occupy Gloria's mind more often. Both of her sons had long since left home. Manny was now living in Phoenix, while David had also moved elsewhere. Though life in El Paso had always felt steady and familiar, it was starting to seem uncertain. Yet moving would mean leaving behind the home where she had rebuilt her life after divorce, raised her sons, and rediscovered herself. This was not just a house. It was part of her story. Leaving felt like surrendering her past, but staying meant living with constant unease. Over time, her thoughts of moving grew into a quiet certainty, signaling that significant changes lay ahead. To truly understand what happened, we need to look back at David, Gloria's younger son. From childhood, David stood out, not for good grades or good behavior, but for his knack for getting into trouble. He found school boring, avoided chores, resisted any attempts at guidance. Unlike his brother Manny, who loved sports and enjoyed learning, David took a different route. He was carefree, ignored school rules, and was constantly distracted by girls. Restless, unfocused. He never stuck with anything for long. His interests were shallow and always shifting. It was clear that David's main concerns were his looks, popularity, and the attention he received. Relatives recalled that even as a teenager, he craved being the center of attention. He knew how to use his good looks, confidence, and charm to his advantage. While his classmates were still figuring out dating, David acted as though he had it all under control. He expected attention, treated girls as just another part of his life, and carried himself with an inflated sense of self-worth that became central to his personality. At 16, David began dating a younger girl who became his official girlfriend. But even then, he continued seeing other girls. To family and friends, he presented her as his serious partner. While secretly pursuing others, she was just 15 when she became pregnant. The situation shocked everyone, forced David to take on responsibility. He dropped out of school, found a job, and proposed. His decision surprised even Gloria, but despite her initial disbelief, she supported her son through the change. She welcomed his girlfriend into the family and quickly stepped in to help with the baby. After the birth of their first son, They went on to have 3 more children. Gloria became essential in their lives, helping to raise her grandchildren, manage the household, and provide financial support. The young family lived with her. Once again, Gloria became the anchor of the home. It was as if she were experiencing motherhood again, this time as a grandmother. She embraced the role wholeheartedly, yet David still struggled to find stability. He bounced between jobs, never staying long and showing little ambition to build a career. Eventually, he was offered a position with a construction company in Phoenix, Arizona. The job paid better and gave him the chance to reunite with Manny, who was already living there. Around this time, their father Armando reappeared after years of silence. He also lives in Phoenix. The decision to relocate came quickly. David's partner and their children moved with him. For David, it was an opportunity to start fresh, improve his finances, rebuild his bond with Manny, and perhaps reconnect with Armando, something he had once thought impossible. In Arizona, family life began to intertwine again. Armando was now living with a partner and raising 2 younger children, Jonathan and Mariah Wilson. Mariah, in particular, admired her older brothers, especially David. To her, he seemed confident, mature, and almost heroic. She spent a great deal of time at David's home, playing with her nephews and helping with the household. His partner, busy raising 4 children, welcomed the extra support. On the surface, family bonds appeared to be growing stronger. During this period, hidden tensions began to surface beneath the appearance of normal life. Mariah became increasingly involved in David's daily routine, and no one seemed to realize how dangerous that closeness could become. As Gloria's younger half-sister, Mariah quickly grew into a constant presence in David's world. But as she matured, David's partner started to notice unsettling changes in his behavior toward Mariah. Outwardly, everything looked fine, yet something felt off. The way they spoke to each other, the subtle gestures, the closeness, it seemed excessive. While it might have been dismissed as family affection, the unease in David's partner only deepened. She questioned whether her worries were just the result of stress and exhaustion, but the feeling would not go away. Not long after, David accepted a job offer in Hawaii and moved there alone. When Mariah was around 15 or 16, David invited her to spend the summer with him. Initially, people thought it was just a family vacation involving her brother, his partner, and their kids. One day, David's partner caught them in the bedroom. Horrified by what she saw, she immediately called Gloria. For Gloria, the news was both shocking and heartbreaking. The idea that something inappropriate might be happening between her son and his half-sister was unbearable. Mariah was sent back to Texas at once. The incident never went public and carried no official consequences, but it changed the family forever. Gloria's trust in David was shattered. Though she tried to carry on as before, she knew this was not a simple mistake. It was something far more serious. Their relationship quickly deteriorated. A bitter argument erupted between mother and son. Gloria voiced her disapproval, condemned David's actions, and insisted he cut all ties with Mariah. She made it clear she would not tolerate anything like this again. David denied everything, accusing others of exaggeration, but Gloria did not believe him. Her life experience, her caution, and her maternal instinct told her the truth ran much deeper. After Mariah returned home, another crisis struck. David was in a devastating motorcycle accident on one of Hawaii's winding roads. He lost control of his bike, and the injuries forced doctors to amputate one of his legs. When Gloria heard, she rushed to Hawaii, setting aside all past conflicts. Her son needed her, and she responded as only a mother could. She stayed by his side throughout his recovery, helping him adjust to his new reality and offering constant reassurance. David later told others his mother never left him, always holding his hand, encouraging him, and making him feel whole, despite what he had lost. After months of rehabilitation, Gloria suggested that David return to El Paso with her. His relationship with his partner had ended, and his ties to his children had faded. Going back with his mother seemed the only option, but Gloria gave him one strict condition. He must cut all contact with Mariah. If he agreed, she promised to keep what had happened a secret and allow him the chance to start fresh. David accepted, and together they returned to Texas. Back in El Paso, Gloria tried to restore a sense of normalcy. David appeared calm, helped around the house, and gave no outward cause for concern. For the first time in years, she felt like she could take back control. The neighbor who had once spied on her from the bushes was still living next door, and his presence continued to make her uneasy. Yet with David home, she felt less vulnerable. Having a man in the house gave her a sense of security. On the surface, it seemed the worst was behind them. Still, Gloria could not silence her instincts. Deep down, she sensed the situation with Mariah was far from resolved. Though life appeared stable, the shadow of betrayal lingered, and she remained vigilant, never fully convinced that her son had truly changed. When David's condition improved and he was able to take care of himself, Gloria decided to take a short trip. Her older son, Manny, had been inviting her to visit him in Phoenix for a long time. And now that her younger son seemed stable, she agreed to go. Before leaving, she asked David to look after the house. At first glance, everything appeared to be fine. He stayed in El Paso, maintained the house, and seemed to follow her instructions. However, while Gloria was in Arizona, her unease grew. The doubts she had tried to ignore became more persistent. She confided in her brother Mark, asked him to check on David to make sure everything was all right and that Mariah wasn't visiting him. Mark promised to check in, but based on her feelings, Gloria suspected he hadn't actually done much to follow through. Gloria's worries continued to grow until she made the sudden decision to return home unexpectedly. When she arrived, she was shocked by what she found. The house, which had always been clean and organized, was now a total mess, with dirt and clutter everywhere. The most alarming discovery was the locked door to her bedroom, which had a new lock she had never seen before. Anxiously, Gloria called David to ask what was happening. He responded that he was at the movies and would return soon. She waited for him. When David finally came home, they got into a heated argument. Gloria accused him of being disrespectful, breaking his promises, allowing the house to fall into disarray. Later that evening, on July 25th, Manny began to feel anxious. He hadn't heard from his mother since she left his house that morning. Despite calling and texting her, he received no replies. He then tried to contact David. Initially, David didn't answer, but as midnight approached, he finally returned Manny's call. David informed Manny that Gloria had come by. They had an argument, and he helped her pack. She likely returned to Phoenix. However, as the night turned into morning, Gloria still hadn't appeared at Manny's place or reached out to any family members. Her phone was off, and there were no messages from her. By the next day, July 26th, it was clear that something was seriously wrong. Manny called David again, but David seemed distant and unhelpful, repeatedly claiming he didn't know anything. His indifference made Manny even more worried, becoming more convinced that something was wrong. By July 27th, Gloria had been missing for 2 days. Manny contacted everyone he could think of, family, friends, and neighbors, but no one had seen her. It felt like she had disappeared completely. Eventually, he decided to call the police, but they told him that the missing person report needed to come from the last person who saw her, which was David. Soon after, other family members, including Gloria's mother and her brother Conrad, arrived at the house. David greeted them at the door, appearing calm and somewhat indifferent. After much persuasion, he finally agreed to go to the police to report Gloria's disappearance. On July 28th, Manny and his wife arrived in El Paso to find something was wrong. As soon as Manny entered the house, he noticed that Gloria's suitcase was in the corner, untouched, and her makeup bag had not been opened. It became clear that she hadn't gone anywhere. She had vanished unexpectedly. David's explanation about helping her pack didn't make sense since her belongings were still there. Additionally, his behavior was unsettling. He seemed calm and detached, not asking questions or showing any signs of concern. Manny pressed David for details about the last time he saw their mother. David showed Manny some text messages from Gloria, in which she asked him to unlock the door for her. Then, unexpectedly, he added a new part to his story. He claimed that after leaving the house, he went to a party at a woman's house, and later that night, went to a club with another woman. He said he didn't return home until around 3 a.m. During their conversation about their mother, David made a comment that raised alarm. He said he worried they might find traces of his DNA on her. After all, he hugged and kissed her. This statement was confusing, especially since Gloria was reported missing, and no one had suggested anything more serious. The following day, July 29th, local detectives brought in the family members for questioning. David repeated his story, but this time he altered some details. He no longer mentioned going to the movies. Instead, he said he spent the whole evening at the party. A woman confirmed his presence, stating he arrived between 7 and 8 p.m., stayed until midnight, and seemed tense. She did not mention anything about him going to a club with another woman. On that same day, troubling news emerged. Gloria's car was discovered abandoned near an elementary school in El Paso. Her personal items, purse, keys, and phone were still inside, but there was no sign of her. This changed the investigation from a missing person case to a potential crime, and the Violent Crimes Unit took over. Officers began canvassing the neighborhood. Several residents reported seeing Gloria's car leave the garage on the morning of July 26th. One witness was confident that she had seen Gloria driving. However, another neighbor had a different account. He stated that he saw a young, light-skinned woman with short blonde hair behind the wheel, and he noticed what appeared to be a man's silhouette in the back seat. This was the first solid evidence suggesting that someone other than Gloria had driven her car after she disappeared. The police searched the house and found bloodstains in the garage, mostly on the door of a built-in cabinet. Although there wasn't a large amount, it appeared fresh, leading them to classify the house as a potential crime scene. This discovery prompted detectives to question David more intensively. His accounts were inconsistent, with discrepancies even in basic facts. He struggled with the timeline, frequently changed the order of events, and introduced new details each time he spoke. Throughout the questioning, he remained unusually calm, showing no concern or asking questions about the investigation, which raised suspicions. The police analyzed the blood samples and began collecting DNA from family members. Manny noticed his brother's strange behavior and couldn't stop thinking about Mariah. He felt uneasy about the close relationship between her and David, leading him to urge the police to consider Mariah as a possible suspect, especially given David's partner's previous comments. Investigators examined cell phone data, which revealed important findings. Records show that David made a call between 1:30 a.m. and 1:40 a.m. On the night of July 25th to 26th, his phone was located almost 4 miles away from where Gloria's car was found. Additionally, there were several calls between David's and Mariah's phones from 5:30 a.m. to 6 a.m., both incoming and outgoing. These inconsistencies, combined with witness statements, changing stories, and digital evidence, suggested that Gloria's disappearance was not an accident, that she did not leave on her own. The investigation had clearly turned into a criminal case, with David being the last known individual to have seen Gloria alive. On July 31, a woman walking her dog discovered the body of a woman in the desert in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. The body had started to decompose. Her head was covered with 2 layers, first with plastic and then with a paper bag. Her left leg and arms were also wrapped in plastic. Investigators quickly realized that whoever committed this crime attempted to conceal any biological evidence, suggesting a deliberate act rather than a spontaneous one. The medical examiner identified the victim as Gloria, who died of suffocation. Her broken larynx indicated that significant physical force was used, showing that the perpetrator had complete control over the situation. This was not a reckless act. It was a calculated and brutal attack. Lab results started to arrive, revealing that the blood samples found in Gloria's garage belonged to Mariah. This discovery made Mariah a key figure in the investigation. Gloria's brother, Mark, informed detectives that before Gloria vanished, she had confided in him her suspicions about David and Mariah having an inappropriate relationship, which he strongly disapproved of. Mariah and David were questioned about their whereabouts on the night of July 25th to 26th. They stated they had spent the entire night together, but cell phone records contradicted this. David's phone made a call at 1:37 a.m., which was almost 4 miles away from where Gloria's body was found later. Additionally, there were calls between David and Mariah at 5:30 a.m. and 6 o'clock a.m. If they were together the whole night, why did they call each other? Under pressure from investigators, Mariah started to change her story. Eventually, she was offered a deal. She would receive full immunity if she provided the complete truth about what happened. She accepted the offer. Mariah explained that Gloria unexpectedly returned home and discovered her there. This led to a heated argument between Gloria and David. Gloria insisted that Mariah leave at once and never return. After Mariah left, David lost his temper and became violent, resulting in Gloria's tragic death. Following this, David contacted Mariah to ask for her assistance in covering up the incident. They cleaned the scene to eliminate any evidence and placed Gloria's body in her car, then drove it out of the city. Mariah also confessed that the blood found in the garage belonged to her, as it was from a prior altercation with David. When David buried Gloria, Mariah stated that she was present nearby. Her confession was a crucial turning point in the investigation. On September 4, 2009, David was arrested and faced charges of causing serious harm, hiding evidence, and destroying evidence. The trial began in May 4, 2010. Mariah, who had been given immunity, testified against him. She revealed that their relationship began when she was 14 and he was 29. A startling detail was that she had a child with David, who was later put up for adoption. This information surprised even those who were aware of their relationship. Many family members were unaware of the complete story. Some remained silent while others never suspected anything wrong. Investigators provided more evidence, but no DNA from David was found on Gloria's body. The defense claimed that the case relied on circumstantial evidence. David remained calm and composed in court, occasionally becoming emotional, but consistently insisted on his innocence. The first trial ended without a clear verdict, because the jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision. To prevent local bias, it was decided to move the trial to San Antonio. July 10, 2010, David Marmolejo was charged with murdering his mother. In 2011, resulting in David being found guilty and sentenced to 54 years in prison. However, the situation continued to evolve. David was extradited to Arizona in December 2016 to face the crimes he committed against escort service. He is awaiting retrial at the Maricopa County Jail, where he has been held since December 8, 2016. David Marmolejo now faces 29 charges, including 15 counts of abuse assault, 4 counts of armed robbery with a deadly weapon, 4 counts of aggravated assault, 2 counts of abuse, and 4 counts of kidnapping. He initially denied the charges, but his story began to change when a Phoenix detective presented him with evidence. David has denied the abuse assault but admitted to picking up approximately 11 escort services during his time in Phoenix. After his arrest in 2006, he was reportedly charged with 4 counts of kidnapping, 4 counts of armed robbery, and 10 counts of abuse, assault. However, the case was dismissed because 3 of the women could not be found, and the 4th refused to cooperate. To avoid a life sentence, he made a plea deal with prosecutors, admitting guilt to 6 of the charges while the others were dismissed. Gloria dedicated her life to raising her sons and did everything she could to pull David back from the edge. In the end, he was the one who destroyed everything she had worked so hard to build. The tragic loss of Gloria Huerta Marmolejo revealed the devastating consequences of betrayal within a family she fought to protect. Her unwavering dedication to her sons, especially David, could not shield her from his descent into violence. Convicted of her murder and facing further charges in Arizona, David's actions shattered the bonds Gloria cherished. Her story serves as a haunting reminder that even the strongest love cannot always mend a broken soul, leaving behind a legacy of grief and a call for vigilance against hidden dangers in those closest to us. In Denmark, one of the safest countries in the world, violent crime is rare. But on the night of February 5, 2022, that illusion of safety was shattered forever. A young woman full of dreams, a city celebrating freedom after lockdown, and a predator hiding in plain sight. Together, they created a tragedy so horrifying that it would haunt the nation for years. What began as a missing person case quickly spiraled into one of the most brutal, shocking crimes Denmark had ever seen. The details were so disturbing, so unexpected, that even seasoned detectives were shaken. February 5, 2022, was the first Saturday after Denmark lifted the restrictions imposed during the global health issues. This was a great relief for everyone, especially young people who had been unable to fully communicate and meet with each other during this time. This included Mia Steven, who with her friends was eagerly awaiting the first parties. They could finally meet and socialize with everyone they hadn't seen in so long. Mia had another reason to celebrate. She had just finished the semester. For her, this meant she was one step closer to fulfilling her dream. Aalborg is a fairly large and vibrant city in Denmark, home to a large student population of approximately 120,000. Late in the evening of February 5, 2022, young people began gathering to fill the bars and clubs that had been closed for the entire time. It was cold outside, so everyone dressed warmly. That day, Mia was wearing dark clothes, except for her white sneakers. She looked smart, but not quite appropriate for the weather. She expected to get home without any problems in her friend's car. The group was assembled. The young people planned to have fun and enjoy the weekend with other university students. Mia went to the party. The group spent several hours there and then began wandering between nightclubs on the street until they finally reached a club. The girl accompanying her danced wildly, even with strangers, and couldn't stop. She'd had a fair amount to drink and wanted to keep having fun. Even though the club was getting close to closing, around 6 o'clock a.m., it was time to leave. Everyone quickly left. Many went home much earlier than Mia. During the party, she met a young man, 22 years old, who was also from Aalborg. After the club closed, the man waited for her outside. He chatted briefly with Mia and her friends before everyone decided to go home. Mia planned to take the bus and contact her friends during the day. Several hours had passed since Mia said goodbye to her friends on the street. She was supposed to return home, but she never showed up. This caused her family to become increasingly worried. However, they were in no rush to contact the police, as it was their first long-awaited party after lockdown, and Mia could simply be out partying, perhaps visiting friends or her boyfriend. However, when her boyfriend called, he admitted he hadn't seen Mia all day. Furthermore, she had ignored his attempts to contact her. Around midday, Mia's mother called all of her friends. Now she was in a panic. As no one had seen Mia since leaving the club, no one could contact her. Even though Mia was responsible, always got in touch and called back if she was delayed. The incident worried the girl's parents more than anything else. The mother was seriously frightened. As it turned out, Mia was last seen at 6 o'clock a.m., and since then, no one could say where she went or where she was. Against this backdrop, her family decided to file a missing person report with the police. Despite the fact that it was a party and Mia had been drinking, the police, fortunately, responded immediately. Detectives began searching. Unfortunately, there was simply no information to guide the investigation. Her family wasn't sitting idle either. Her father drove around the area. Her mother and sister posted an appeal on social media, asking for help from anyone with any information. Photos and descriptions of Mia, including her clothing, were widely circulated. Given the rarity of such cases in Denmark, the entire local community and Mia's immediate family actively shared posts and information, trying to spread it far and wide. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation. Detectives took the report seriously, which gave them hope for a speedy resolution. In Denmark, law enforcement officials considered the incident a worst-case scenario and acted as quickly as possible, taking into account the potential risks. Investigators immediately began their work, Their first priority was to obtain information about the incident, which was sorely lacking. To this end, all local residents in the area where Mia disappeared were asked to provide all possible materials, especially photographs and mobile phone videos that could show her at the party. Naturally, CCTV footage from all nearby stores and establishments was reviewed. The situation was complicated by the fact that the area was very busy, home to numerous clubs and bars, all packed to capacity. Finding a specific person there was difficult. The police also spoke with the man who had met Mia's group and was among the last to communicate with her. However, he had a confirmed alibi. He had immediately left by taxi. Local residents readily responded to the request for assistance, and the station received around 400 calls from citizens eager to share recordings. Witnesses provided thousands of video files they had recorded that night and the following morning during nearby parties, leaving law enforcement with hundreds of hours of video to sift through. The task was massive, and it took detectives several days to complete. It seemed as if the entire town had united in an attempt to save Mia from an unknown fate. Family and friends feared she might have simply frozen to death. However, this seemed unlikely, as she was nowhere to be found on the streets. After reviewing the initial videos, detectives found nothing suspicious. Her friends' accounts were fully corroborated. Mia had indeed left the club after closing around 6 o'clock a.m., chatted briefly with friends, and headed to the bus stop. Meanwhile, police investigated Mia's past, hoping her background would provide insight and direction for the investigation. She was 22 years old at the time of her disappearance. Her family described her as a sweet and energetic girl who dreamed of helping people. Since 2016, Mia had been studying medicine at Aalborg University, the country's largest university, and was soon to graduate. She was also an aspiring model and had participated in several photo shoots. There was nothing unusual in this brief biography that suggested a reason for the tragedy. She had no criminal connections, no history of banned substances use, and no history of mental illness. There were no suspicious people in her social circle either. That night, Mia was behaving erratically. She had been drinking heavily and was acting a bit out of control. She danced with many strangers. Her attractiveness could have provoked a potentially dangerous man to see her as easy prey and attack. By February 7, 2022, more than 24 hours had passed since her disappearance. During this period, law enforcement officials appealed to the public again, asking potential eyewitnesses to provide any valuable information that could aid in the search for Mia. Officers continued to carefully review the party footage, which was constantly being received. Requiring considerable resources, all the young men Mia had met that evening, both friends and new acquaintances, were questioned at the police station. That same day, detectives noticed something unusual on one of the surveillance cameras. At 6:09 a.m. on February 6, Mia approached a bus stop 300 meters from the club, likely waiting for a bus home. A car pulled up next to her, but she didn't get in. After speaking with the driver, she continued waiting for the bus, and the car drove off. But the bus still didn't come. Even an hour and a half later, at 7:35 a.m., she was still standing outside. Obviously, she could have frozen. As she wasn't dressed for the weather, she had apparently given up waiting for the bus and didn't know what to do. At that moment, the same black car pulled up next to her again. The driver slowed down, and they had another conversation. Afterward, Mia got in. When her family found out about this, they found it absurd, as friends and family knew Mia as a principled woman who would never get into a stranger's car. Apparently frozen and desperate, she made an exception. Law enforcement officers carefully reviewed the entire recording, but were unable to obtain a clear image of the license plate or the driver's face due to the poor quality of the footage. Thus, it was clear whose car Mia had gotten into, but it was also clear that the driver was the last known person to see her safe and sound. Finding and questioning this driver was crucial. On February 8th, a further appeal was made to the public for help. The police hoped that people who knew the driver would come forward, and they did receive several leads to follow up. Detectives also spoke with Mia's friends again to confirm the timeline. They described in detail how the group began to disperse after a brief conversation in the parking lot around 6:20 a.m. The friend who walked Mia to the bus stop described the route she took. This yielded results. Investigators managed to spot several more surveillance cameras that should have captured the girl and the stopped car. The investigation yielded footage that proved a real breakthrough. It was revealed that the vehicle had unusual license plates painted in more than 2 colors. Moreover, the footage was of higher quality, allowing them to see all the symbols on the license plate, which allowed them to obtain information about the owner more quickly. They were able to track him down. This man lives in a house a few streets away from the club. Upon arriving at the address, detectives discovered the car, a black 2015 Volkswagen Golf, the same car captured on surveillance footage. Detectives tracked down the black Volkswagen, registered to Thomas Thompson. He denies any involvement with Mia. However, he must have known something, as he was the one using the car for about 24 hours when the incident occurred. According to Danish law, he was arrested. By February 10, 2022, 4 days had passed since Mia's disappearance. No one had offered any clues regarding her whereabouts, and no ransom demand had been made. The chances of finding her alive diminished with each passing minute, although family and friends remain hopeful. Police admit the chances of her being alive are almost zero. Thomas Thompson consented to 4 weeks of detention. During this period, detectives actively investigated his background and interviewed his acquaintances. Thomas, born on June 18, 1985, grew up in the southeast before moving to a small Danish town. He initially lived in an apartment and later moved to his grandparents' farm. He pursued a career in the military, rising to the rank of sergeant. After his military service, he trained as an electrician. He is described as a capable, polite, calm, and pleasant professional, though somewhat reserved, withdrawn. Despite this, he also had a darker side. Before this incident, however, Thomas had no history of violent crime. He abstained from alcohol and had no alcohol-related incidents during his military service. He held a position of responsibility and had training in martial arts, even earning a first aid certificate. Investigators began by examining the vehicle's GPS data. Upon confiscating the vehicle, they discovered he had attempted to disable the GPS approximately 4 hours before meeting Mia at the bus stop, a detail that suggested intentionality. A dedicated digital forensics team was able to reconstruct his route accurately using security camera footage. The route began at Thompson's home, and then he circled the city several times, picked up Mia, and drove through several nearby towns with brief stops before entering a wooded area a few kilometers away. He lingered in this wooded area for several hours, making it the most suspicious point on the route. At the same time, investigators deployed specially trained sniffer dogs to search the area. Within a short distance, they quickly located a hair tie, fragments of clothing, underwear, and other personal items, scattered in a straight line. These were presumed to belong to Mia, as pieces of clothing found were similar to what she was wearing. The evening she disappeared, the dogs led the police deeper into the forest, near a local village, where they discovered several areas of disturbed earth, clearly excavated. Beneath the soil were dismembered human remains, finely chopped into a total of 231 fragments, many scattered around the grave. Some remains were never found. All the physical evidence was collected and sent to a lab for analysis. Forensic experts quickly confirmed the remains were Mia's. However, the condition of the remains complicated their work, making it difficult to determine the precise cause of death. Law enforcement officials decided to share the facts with the public, announcing Mia's death and the arrest of the suspected killer. Detectives vowed to continue the investigation thoroughly. According to the medical examiner, the cause of death was asphyxiation, and an electric saw was used to dismember the body. Most of the remains were severely damaged, suggesting prolonged exposure to a highly alkaline solution. On the night of Mia's disappearance, Thomas had indeed disabled his car's GPS at 2:14 a.m. However, due to a technical glitch, his location was being recorded every 15 seconds. When questioned about disabling the tracking system, He claimed he did so because a police officer held a grudge against him and harassed him at every opportunity. However, Thomas only reactivated his GPS at 9:23 a.m. Presumably, by that time, the murder and dismemberment had already occurred. He likely took the body to his house, where he dismembered it. Thomas then admitted to taking Mia. He claimed he was driving past a bus stop and saw Mia, who looked cold and inappropriately dressed for the weather. He offered her a ride home as a favor. He further stated that Mia acted flirtatiously in the car. They drove towards several populated areas, then into a wooded area. There, Mia and Thomas engaged in consensual intimate, but at some point, Mia suffered a seizure and accidentally fell, sustaining a fatal neck fracture. However, his account later changed significantly. He eventually asserted that Mia had gotten out of the car, tripping and falling and sustaining a fatal injury. He claimed that when Mia stopped showing signs of life, he panicked and didn't call emergency services, fearing he would be charged with murder due to previous run-ins with the law. Thomas claimed his only option was to take the body home, attempt to dispose of it. Initially, he tried to dissolve the body in a chemical solution for almost a day, but this failed to achieve the desired result. He then chopped the remaining parts into pieces, burying most of them and scattering the smaller fragments around the burial site. He also attempted to burn the clothes he was wearing on the day of the murder, as well as Mia's car mat and bag, which might have contained bloodstains. Fragments of clothing and a tool possibly used in the crime were found in the ashes. Thomas insisted the incident was an accident and that the attempted disposal of the body was driven by fear. Detectives, however, held a different opinion, as the elaborate method of disposal spoke volumes. Such cruelty seemed the work of a madman. Investigators believed Thomas had offered to take Mia home with malicious intent from the start. Evidence of premeditation was apparent in his attempt to disable the Jeep, which, fortunately, failed and helped map his route. He only managed to lure Mia into the car on his second attempt, waiting an hour and a half for the perfect moment until she was completely cold and desperate enough to agree to get into the car. As soon as Mia got inside, he began threatening her with a weapon, intimidating her, and then abusing her. He then decided to kill her to prevent her from calling the police. In a horrific way, the most likely cause of death, according to the medical examiner, was strangulation. A significant portion of the remains were never recovered. Mia was clearly trying to escape from her attacker, which rules out any possibility of her being intimate voluntarily. The abuse seemed certain, and the murder the result of resistance. Abuse was also indirectly confirmed. Though post-mortem abuse could not be ruled out, it was impossible to prove given the condition of the remains. Thomas remained stubbornly silent and refused to disclose details. Prosecutors claimed Thomas picked up Mia with the intention of abusing her from the start. According to the prosecution, Thomas hunted all night, and after choosing a suitable victim, he waited for the right moment to lure the victim into a trap. The fact that Mia desperately tried to escape was confirmed by analyzing the GPS data. Law enforcement officers noticed that Thomas made 3 stops in the wooded area, suggesting he pursued Mia by car, that she escaped several times, only for he to catch her and drag her back. An inspection of Thomas's car revealed DNA samples from Mia inside. A search of his home also revealed her bloodstains, confirming that Thomas had brought Mia's body home with him. Thomas's behavior during the attempted disposal of the body was analyzed. He maintained a normal life, except for taking the day off from work, which he used to dismember his victim. Meanwhile, he communicated calmly with friends and acquaintances, ordering pizza and grocery deliveries, including a large quantity of sweets. He seemed to feel no remorse. Mia's family said his claim that she may have consensually been intimate with a stranger was a blatant lie and disrespected her memory. As the investigation revealed, Thomas may have had far more serious prior offenses than initially thought. It turned out that in 2019, he was caught peeping on a student. Similar incidents occurred in 2015, when he peeped into the windows of 2 other girls and behaved inappropriately. One of the victims reported hearing a knock on her window in the middle of the night. When she approached, she saw a strange man standing there with his pants down, a blank look in his eyes, She immediately woke her parents. Thomas fled. Thomas's ex-girlfriends also described disturbing episodes in his behavior, saying that he quickly became arrogant and manipulative after the relationship began. He demanded unquestioning obedience and was easily angered by the slightest disobedience. Another woman described how he tied her naked to a radiator and abused her. Despite the prosecution's overwhelming evidence, Thomas pleaded not guilty to Mia's abuse and murder. However, he agreed to admit responsibility for the inappropriate handling of the body and dismemberment, denying any involvement in the murder, claiming her death was an accident. But this proved unconvincing. Even if Mia had accidentally suffered a fatal injury, he could have called for help, and an autopsy would have confirmed his innocence. Instead, Thomas chose to cut her into pieces and didn't even administer first aid. Despite knowing the necessary techniques, in June 2023, 38-year-old Thomas Thompson was found guilty of Mia Skadhauge-Steven's murder. He was also found guilty of indecent assault with a body under aggravating circumstances, but was acquitted of abuse due to lack of conclusive evidence. Prosecutors requested a life sentence, while his lawyer insisted on a 16-year prison sentence. Thomas was sentenced to life imprisonment because he is considered a danger to others and will be eligible for parole after 10 years. Experience shows that, on average, offenders with this type of sentence spend just over 13 years behind bars. This crime stirred up so much public outrage that a volunteer organization was even created with the primary goal of ensuring the safety of young people who might become victims of the killer.